Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Today, we're stepping behind the scenes of one of the most legendary magical events, the Triwizard Tournament. Many remember the drama of the Goblet of Fire, but few know the astonishing details behind this ancient competition. Get ready to discover some unexpected facts from its centuries-long history. Enjoy the video. Number 1. The tournament is over 700 years old. The Triwizard Tournament holds a place in the wizarding world much like the Olympics does among Muggles. Its roots stretch deep into the Middle Ages, all the way back to 1294. That was the year when the three greatest magical schools of Europe, Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang, came together to create a grand contest. The tournament became not just a stage for showcasing magical skill, but a symbol of cooperation, friendship, and of course, fair magical rivalry between the schools. Over time, it evolved into one of the most prestigious traditions in the wizarding world. Number 2. The competition was held every 5 years. To keep the tournament from fading into obscurity, the founders decided it should be held regularly, once every 5 years. This rhythm allowed the event to preserve its legacy and maintain its status. Imagine if the Olympics were held once and then never again. In the same way, the tournament, despite its dangers and long pauses, always found its way back, adding up to over 100 contests throughout the centuries. Number 3, Durmstrang, the eternal underdog. With 3 schools competing, you'd expect victories to rotate over time, giving each a chance to take home the coveted cup. But history says otherwise. Durmstrang, despite its fearsome reputation and powerful wizards like Victor Crumb, has never won the tournament. Over 125 attempts and not a single victory. A mystery worthy of deeper thought. Surely at least one student should have made it to the top by now. But history had other plans. Number 4, Hogwarts. 63 wins, Beauxbatons 62. Things look quite different for the other 2 schools. Until the 1994 tournament, Hogwarts and Beauxbatons were neck and neck, each with 62 victories. But after the unusual final that year, where 2 champions from Hogwarts, Harry and Cedric, competed, the British school pulled ahead. Although, to be fair, the win bent the rules. Traditionally, only one student from each school is allowed to compete. But fate, as we know, doesn't always follow the rules. Number 5. In ancient times, there were no age restrictions. When Dumbledore announced that only students aged 17 or older could participate, many hearts sank, especially the Weasley twins, who famously tried to trick the age line with a bit of aging potion. But had they lived a few centuries earlier, there would have been no such obstacle. In the past, there were no age limits at all. As long as you were a student, you could enter your name. The only rule was 1 champion per school. Number 6. The tragedy of 1792. In 1792, the tournament came to an abrupt halt, and not without reason. During one of the tasks, contestants were required to capture a cockatrice, a magical creature with the head of a rooster and the body of a lizard. But the cockatrice escaped, and chaos ensued. Several teachers and students were injured in the mayhem, leading to widespread panic. The tournament was then officially suspended and remained inactive for more than 2 centuries. It wasn't until 1994, after many efforts to revive the tradition, that the tournament finally returned, this time within the walls of Hogwarts. Number 7. The Muggle Prime Minister was informed. Surprisingly, but truly, the Muggle Prime Minister was aware of the Triwizard Tournament. In The Half-Blood Prince, J.K. Rowling describes how Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic, regularly visited his Muggle counterpart. During one of these visits, Fudge informed him that dragons from Romania and a sphinx would be brought into the UK for the tournament tasks, all in the name of transparency and safety. Thus, the wizarding world didn't just watch over its own, it also made efforts to prevent magical mishaps from spilling into the Muggle world. A true act of interworld diplomacy. Number 8. The Goblet didn't always choose 1 champion. The rule was sacred, 1 champion per school. Always, But in 1994, the Goblet of Fire broke its own law. It chose Cedric Diggory, the expected champion of Hogwarts. Then, moments later, it flared again and spit out the name Harry Potter. Gasps echoed through the great hall. Dumbledore's voice cut the silence. Harry Potter? Even he sounded uncertain. What happened next would change the tournament forever. The official explanation pointed to deception. Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, had bewitched the Goblet to accept Harry as a fourth champion. It was a dark manipulation. But some wizards still whisper a different theory, that the Goblet sensed something beyond magic, that Harry was marked not just by a curse, but by fate itself. He is a marked boy, Dumbledore once said. Perhaps the Goblet didn't make a mistake. Perhaps it made a choice no one understood. Number 9, the tournament inspired famous duelists. Not all tasks in the early Triwizard tournaments involved creatures or curses. Some involved each other. For nearly a century, the second task was often a duel. Formal, wand-to-wand, spell against spell. It wasn't meant to wound. It was meant to showcase control, precision, and magical elegance. Edgar Lafont, who later became chief duelist of the French Magical Guard, first rose to fame by defeating 2 older champions in a triple duel finale. His final spell, a mirror charm that rebounded a stunning hex mid-air, was copied for years in wizarding academies. He didn't overpower them, one judge wrote. He outthought them. Isabelle Lemierre was only 16 when she stepped into the dueling ring in 1631. Her opponent, a brash Scottish wizard twice her size, mocked her before the match. She silenced him with a perfectly timed, non-verbal, disarming charm, and never spoke a word during the entire match. That year, Beauxbatons won the tournament, and Lemierre became a legend. But not everyone walked away unscarred. By 1692, the duels had become too personal. Rivalries turned violent. One champion left blind, another never spoke again. The dueling round was quietly removed, but the stories never faded. Number 10. The prize wasn't always money. The golden prize in Goblet of Fire was 1,000 galleons, enough to tempt, but not enough to define a legend. In the older days, the Triwizard tournament offered something far rarer, magical heirlooms crafted by masters long forgotten. In 1463, champion Mirek Selesny of Durmstrang received the amulet of Vivera. It held a single drop of wyvern blood encased in obsidian glass. The charm granted complete immunity to magical fire for 7 years. Selesny later survived a basilisk attack during a cave expedition, and the amulet was credited. It vanished after his death. Some believe it was buried with him beneath the Black Cliffs. Others claim it was stolen by Gringotts rebels during the Goblin riots. Another winner, Celeste Marceau of Beauxbatons, was gifted a wand made of starlight ash and Vila hair. It shimmered in moonlight and was said to whisper warnings before danger. She cast spells like music, one admirer wrote. None of these prizes were practical exactly, but they weren't meant to be. They were symbols of mastery, sacrifice, and mystery. Today we count gold. Back then they counted legacy. Number 11, there was a zero task. Before the dragons, before the lakes and mazes, there was something older, something quieter. Ancient scrolls from the 14th century mention a hidden trial, whispered among the judges as the zero task. It wasn't about spells or speed, it was about the soul. Champions would be placed under enchantment, a crafted illusion drawn from their fears, desires, and secrets. In that world, they faced a choice: betray a friend for victory or lose everything for the sake of honor. The choice was never real, but what it revealed was. In 1615, a Hogwarts student named Helena Fawley was seen wandering the halls in tears after the zero task. She had chosen to let her twin sister fall into a pit of fire, believing it was the only way forward. When she learned it was an illusion, she collapsed. "I didn't know I was capable of it," she reportedly said. Fawley went on to win the tournament, but she never celebrated. She refused the prize money, never competed in magic again. Her portrait still hangs in the Hogwarts library, a reminder of what the tournament used to demand. Whether the 1994 champions faced the zero task is unknown. Dumbledore never spoke of it. Some say the Ministry forbade it, fearing the results could not be controlled. Others whisper it was too dangerous to cast again. But when Harry faced Cedric's lifeless body and chose to bring him back, when he grasped the cup not for glory but to return home, perhaps that was the real test, the one no one planned, the one that mattered. Number 12. The revival of the tournament was officially banned. The year was 1792. A cockatrice unleashed during the final task turned the Triwizard tournament into a disaster. 3 headmasters were maimed, 1 student disappeared, panic spread faster than spellfire. The Ministry of Magic responded with force, not with healing, not with reform, but with a decree. The Triwizard tournament was banned, not paused, not postponed, forbidden. The ruling was clear: no further inter-school magical contests of this nature shall be held under the Ministry's jurisdiction. Signed, sealed, and locked away in the Department of Magical Games and Sports. For nearly 2 centuries, the ban held firm. Proposals came and went. Hogwarts floated the idea in 1883, denied. Durmstrang petitioned in 1901, denied. Even Beauxbatons under the elegant but sharp Madame Lenoir tried in 1947, denied again. The tournament had become legend, romanticized in books, studied in history classes, but never again lived, until Albus Dumbledore stepped forward. He wasn't alone. Olympe Maxime of Beauxbatons and Igor Karkaroff of Durmstrang stood with him. Together they persuaded the Ministry to allow one last experiment, one tournament, one chance to restore what was lost. Dumbledore framed it as tradition, not ambition. "We believe that the Triwizard tournament will strengthen ties between our schools," he said, his voice echoing through the great hall. But the risks were enormous. Even the Goblet seemed uncertain, its flames sputtering strangely that year. Safety spells were rewritten, age lines drawn, contracts reinforced. But as we know, none of it was enough. Cedric Diggory died, Harry Potter saw the Dark Lord return, and the word experiment took on a bitter, final meaning. After 1994, no one asked for a second chance. The Ministry said nothing, the schools said less. The Goblet was returned to storage, its flame extinguished. And though no new decree was issued, silence itself became the law. The tournament, it seemed, had used up its final life. Number 13. Judges were often not impartial. Fairness was the official promise of the Triwizard tournament. But behind the scenes, bias ran deep. Judges were meant to reward courage, intelligence, and magical skill. Yet too often, old rivalries and loyalties tipped the scales. If a judge had once studied at Beauxbatons, would they truly give full marks to a Durmstrang student? If a Hogwarts headmistress bore a grudge from a past competition, could she remain objective? The answer, history shows, is no. The scandal of 1738 remains the clearest example. Madame Cornelia Blecko, a silver-haired enchantress and proud Beauxbatons alumna, sat as one of the 5 judges. Her own school's champion, Elise Fournier, failed spectacularly in a task involving a charmed sphinx. She panicked, broke her wand and collapsed. The crowd was silent, and yet Blescott raised her wand and announced, 10 points. Gasps followed. Professor Galloway of Hogwarts rose in protest, red-faced. Headmaster Kovac of Durmstrang slammed his chair to the ground. A duel was narrowly avoided. The fallout was swift. That same year, the Tournament Council changed the rules. From then on, at least 2 judges had to come from neutral magical communities. No school affiliation, no national bias. Switzerland, Ireland, and even a few scholars from the North Atlantic Wand Conservatory became regular presences at the judging table. Still, whispers lingered. As Rita Skeeter once wrote in the Daily Prophet, neutrality is a charming illusion, especially when wands are drawn and reputations are at stake. Even in modern times, the shadow of partiality remained. In Goblet of Fire, Ludo Bagman cheered for Harry louder than any other judge. When Fleur Delacour received a harsh score after rescuing only her sister from the lake, she hissed, "I was not there for the points." Her voice was proud, but wounded. The crowd clapped. The judges wrote their numbers. And somewhere in the crowd, someone surely wondered, were these scores earned or assigned? Number 14. Participants could refuse, but almost never did. The Goblet of Fire was meant to be binding. Once your name emerged from its blue flames, your fate was sealed. But the truth is more complex. According to the ancient charter of the Triwizard tournament, a chosen student could refuse to participate. Formally, yes, walking away was allowed, but in the eyes of the wizarding world, such a choice was unthinkable. It was shameful, a coward's move. Worse, it stained not just the student, but the honor of their entire school. In a tradition built on bravery, refusing the tournament was like refusing your place in history. There have only been 4 recorded cases of a student rejecting the Goblet's call. One of the most infamous occurred in 1667. Hugo Elstrom, a pale and clever 6th year from Durmstrang, stood in front of the entire hall and said the words no one expected. "I withdraw." The reason? Not fear, not weakness. Hugo later claimed, "I will not fight for a school that doesn't fight for me." Rumours swirled about a conflict with Durmstrang's headmaster, involving ancient blood rites and a failed duel in the dungeons. Whatever the truth, Hugo's name was erased from the walls of honour. His wand was broken by the school council. He was expelled before sunrise. Elstrom's story echoed for decades. In Beauxbatons and Hogwarts, his name became a warning whispered in corridors. "Don't pull an Elstrom," teachers muttered to hot-headed students. Durmstrang refused to acknowledge him at all. His legacy was reduced to a shadow, not of failure in battle, but of defiance. And defiance, to the traditionalists who upheld the tournament, was the greater sin. One chronicler wrote, "Better to die in the maze than to flee from it." Number 15. Some tasks were deliberately deadly. The Triwizard tournament, long shrouded in legends and dramatic retellings, is often remembered today through the narrow lens of the events of 1994. That year, the tournament was resurrected after a century-long ban, and many believed that the chaos that ensued was a result of external manipulation, namely, the dark intervention of Lord Voldemort. However, this perspective obscures a far more disturbing truth. The tournament was always dangerous, not by mistake, not by sabotage, but by design. It was not an exception that the challenges were life-threatening. It was the tradition. The modern wizarding world, with its ministry regulations and committees for the safety of magical creatures and humans alike, forgets that the tournament was born in blood. In the early 15th century, magical duels were still fought to the death, and strength was often proved not through knowledge, but through endurance. In 1430, during one of the earliest recorded iterations of the tournament, a challenge required champions to cross a lake infested with graphorns, giant aggressive beasts with hide tougher than dragon scales and a temperament even less forgiving. Of the 3 students representing Beauxbatons, Durmstrang and Hogwarts that year, only one emerged from the water. The others were not saved in time. Their names were engraved on their school's memorial walls, but the event was never stopped. It was considered a lesson in bravery, not a tragedy. Professor Emmerich Vostradamus, who chronicled many of the early tournaments in his now-banned book, Trials of Glory, described that task in chilling detail. The Hogwarts champion, a boy named Alric Thorne, was pulled under by a graphorn just meters from the shore. He vanished beneath the ink-dark water with a cry that echoed across the silent crowd. No spells saved him, for none were allowed during that phase of the challenge. It was meant to test natural strength, not magical intervention. The Beauxbatons champion, a witch named Isabeau Fleuron, barely made it out with a torn leg and a shattered wand. Only Durmstrang's Roderick Vens managed to cross, using a stolen strand of kelpie hair to mask his presence from the beasts. The tournament at its core was a proving ground for magical excellence, yes, but it was also an expression of cultural values long outgrown. In the 17th century, one popular challenge involved entering an enchanted forest at midnight, where the trees moved of their own will, their roots snapping like serpents, their branches slashing like whips. In 1682, 5 champions entered, but only 2 returned. One of them had lost his sight permanently, the other had aged prematurely due to a time distortion spell buried within the woods. "The price of glory is often your youth," wrote Phineas Nigellus Black, then a student at Hogwarts who watched the event unfold from the towers. This mindset, that glory demanded risk, was embedded in the tournament's very structure. It was not meant to be safe, it was meant to be transformative. The transformation, however, was not always metaphorical. In 1792, the tournament was cancelled midway after a cockatrice broke free during a task designed to test magical control. The creature went on a rampage, injuring dozens, including several Ministry observers. Yet even after this, the tournament was not abolished. Rather, the hosts simply changed the kind of creatures they used, favouring those whose lethal tendencies were easier to suppress with a wand flick, until they weren't. The notion that the 1994 tournament was uniquely dangerous is a modern myth, often propagated by those wishing to downplay how brutal the older challenges truly were. In fact, when the tournament was revived at Hogwarts, several older professors, among them Professor Karkaroff and even Albus Dumbledore himself, voiced concern not about the danger, but about the watering down of its legacy. Dumbledore would never have allowed it to continue, some say, forgetting that Dumbledore did allow it to proceed, even when it became clear something was wrong. He understood that the Triwizard tournament was never safe. That was the point. Consider the infamous 1798 challenge known as the Vault of Stone. Champions were required to descend into an ancient cavern system deep beneath the Alps, where magic was unreliable and light itself was devoured by enchanted shadows. The challenge was not merely to navigate the maze, it was to survive the maze's hunger. Of the 4 champions who entered, one was never found. The others emerged days later, dehydrated and broken. One reportedly never spoke again. The cavern is now sealed and marked as a forbidden site by the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. Yet the tournament persisted, even after multiple student deaths, multiple magical catastrophes, and near exposures to the Muggle world. The tournament was only ever paused, not abandoned. The cultural attachment to spectacle was stronger than caution. The phrase "death is the price of legend" became common among certain Durmstrang professors who believed that the tournament prepared young wizards for war, not just fame. For centuries, these schools saw the tournament not as a contest, but as training. In 1876, one of the most disturbing tasks on record involved the use of a boggart that had been allowed to absorb the nightmares of thousands of students before being unleashed on the champions. The result was catastrophic. The boggart, now saturated with dark energy and enhanced through unregulated magic, induced hallucinations that led one participant to fatally strike another, believing her to be a Dementor. The judges ruled it an unfortunate misunderstanding, and the victor was still awarded the cup. It is important to note that the magical world did not lack the means to make the tournament safer. Protective enchantments, healing spells, emergency interventions, all were known but often not implemented. Why? Because the danger was part of the appeal. To remove the danger, wrote one unnamed Durmstrang headmaster, would be to remove the soul of the tournament. Pain refines character, fear reveals courage, magic is nothing without consequence. Number 16, the Goblet, sometimes chose the tasks. In the dim candlelight of the Beauxbatons library, hidden beneath layers of dust and forgotten parchment, lies a singular scroll no longer listed in the official curriculum of magical history. Known only to a handful of historians and archivists, it is called Vera Notitia de Trium Magorum Certamine, True Accounts of the Triwizard Contest. This manuscript, written in precise Latin script and bound in enchanted leather, tells a version of the tournament long since buried by time and politics. In it lies a striking revelation. In its earliest forms, the Triwizard Tournament's tasks were not devised by wizards or judges at all. They were created, conjured, some might say, by the Goblet of Fire itself. To modern readers, the goblet is remembered merely as a selection device, its spectral blue flame casting names into the air with an air of impartiality. But the old magics woven into its core are far older than Hogwarts itself. Crafted not just to choose but to test, the Goblet once held the ancient and controversial ability to tailor each challenge to the inner landscape of the champion it had named. It wasn't simply drawing lots, it was gazing into the soul. In the year 1294, during one of the earliest recorded tournaments, a Durmstrang champion by the name of Matvei Zorin was selected alongside two others, Aloysia Bellichamp of Beauxbatons and Cedric Ashcombe of Hogwarts. What occurred during that tournament defied modern understanding of magical trials. The first task, unlike in later years, was not the same for each. Matvei, a talented conjurer known for his arrogance and impatience, found himself sealed in a shifting maze of illusion where he had to distinguish truth from conjured lies. He emerged 2 hours later, pale and shaken, whispering of visions that taunted his fears of inadequacy. Aloysia, on the other hand, was transported to a floating glass chamber above a thundering waterfall, an architectural marvel made of nothing she could touch or break. Inside, a sleeping wyvern lay curled around a wand that looked suspiciously like her own. The task was one of patience and empathy. She had to awaken the beast not with force, but with song. Records state that she wept for hours before the creature stirred not by magic, but by her sorrow. Meanwhile, Cedric Ashcombe was faced with neither creature nor puzzle. Instead, he walked into a circular room with a single mirror. The mirror spoke, yes, spoke, and showed him his late brother, urging him to abandon the tournament altogether. The task, unknown to Cedric at first, was to resist the offer of resurrection in exchange for forfeiture. He barely passed, with a single tear rolling down his cheek as he walked away from the phantom. These differences raised not only eyebrows but outright alarm. The Wizarding Council of the day accused the Goblet of being unstable, dangerous, even sentient, but defenders of the artifact like High Enchanter Norbertus Viel argued that the Goblet had done something far more powerful than replicate dragons or riddles. It had understood. It had tailored its trials not to showcase magical skill, but to weigh moral fiber, emotional endurance, and spiritual clarity. The Goblet does not conjure fire, Viel once wrote, it conjures fate. In time, this practice was discarded, replaced by standardized challenges, often involving dragons, mermaids, or enchanted labyrinths. But why the change? The answer, as often with magic, lies in fear. One tournament, held in 1463, ended in catastrophe when a Bulgarian champion named Danica Mladen was given a task that preyed too closely upon her personal traumas. She faced an endless corridor of doors, each containing a person from her past, begging to be saved. It was later revealed these were not illusions, they were real individuals transported through unauthorized magic. 3 people died. The Goblet, once praised for its intuition, was then condemned for cruelty. The idea that the Goblet of Fire could think has always remained controversial. Albus Dumbledore, though he never admitted to believing it, did once hint at its enigmatic nature. "Age confers wisdom," he said to a group of students years before the 1994 tournament, "but not always mercy. The Goblet is ancient." That simple phrase, both a warning and a riddle, might be the closest the modern wizarding world has come to acknowledging its potential intelligence. What remains striking is how little this history is discussed. Even in Hogwarts, a history, there is no mention of divergent tasks or the Goblet's formative autonomy. Only in fringe texts and oral traditions from the 3 founding schools do such stories linger. In a battered journal housed at Beauxbatons, the former headmistress Coralie Devereux described her own experience as a champion in 1749. She wrote, "The flames of the Goblet whispered in dreams for 3 nights before the task. I knew what it would be, and still it broke me." Her task, as preserved in her own hand, was a confrontation with her younger self, naive, eager, and full of a fire she had long extinguished. She was told to teach the girl a spell the girl did not yet know without speaking. The girl resisted. She doubted. And Coralie, standing in silence, had to believe in her ability to guide herself. an act of faith and patience she had lost in adulthood. Perhaps the most compelling account is that of Gregor Malkin, a Hogwarts scribe who recorded the 1571 tournament. In his journals he observed that each contestant was sent not to a public arena, but disappeared for hours, returning with expressions of awe, despair, or utter silence. When asked why the tournament had been so private, Malkin wrote, "The Goblet chose not only the tasks but the eyes allowed to witness them. If this is true, then the Goblet may have possessed a magic beyond comprehension, a sentience not of emotion but of design. It observed, it selected, and it judged, but it also hid, cloaking its work from prying minds." Such magic veers close to the oldest enchantments, those found in the Department of Mysteries or whispered in the halls of Ilvermorny. Number 17. The Last Real Tournament. Was in 1994, the year was 1994, and within the ancient stone walls of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, a long dormant tradition was about to awaken. The Triwizard tournament, once banned in the 19th century due to the staggering death toll it had claimed, was reborn with optimism and spectacle. Banners hung from towers, foreign students marched through the Great Hall, and the magical community buzzed with excitement. Yet what began with pride and ceremony would end in horror. And for many that year became the final chapter in the tournament's troubled history. The last official Triwizard tournament was intended to bridge the divide between Europe's greatest magical schools, Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang. The goal was unity, camaraderie, and a celebration of magical skill. But by the time the final task ended, the only things left were grief, suspicion, and the chilling certainty that the Dark Lord had returned. Cedric Diggory's death marked more than the end of a life. It symbolized the death of trust in magical tradition. Cedric's demise was not an unfortunate accident within the parameters of a risky game. It was murder, cold, deliberate, and symbolic. "Kill the spare," Voldemort had hissed, and in an instant a bright, promising student was struck down by Peter Pettigrew's wand. That moment shattered the illusion that the Triwizard tournament could ever again be a mere competition. What had been designed as a gesture of peace became the catalyst for a new war. The Ministry of Magic, especially under Cornelius Fudge, hesitated to acknowledge what had transpired. Fudge refused to believe Harry Potter's account, refused to accept that Lord Voldemort had risen again. But even in his stubbornness, even in the thick of denial, he did not dare propose another tournament. There was an unspoken consensus. Such danger could not be sanctioned again under the guise of tradition. It is important to remember how the tournament was structured. 3 deadly tasks, each more dangerous than the last. A dragon, a lake filled with creatures of the deep, and a maze that turned into a trap. The tasks were supposed to challenge intellect and courage, but instead they showcased recklessness. While the judges, Ludo Bagman, Barty Crouch Sr., Madame Maxime, and Igor Karkaroff, debated fairness and scoring, students were fighting for their lives. The glory that once surrounded the Triwizard Cup became meaningless when it turned into a portkey, delivering its holders straight into the arms of death. Professor McGonagall later commented in private circles that while she admired the courage of the champions, she had never supported the tournament's return. "We forget too easily that children, no matter how talented, are still children," she reportedly said. Dumbledore himself had expressed misgivings before the first task even began. Though he greeted the event with ceremony, he did not celebrate it with joy. Perhaps he had always suspected that darkness would find a way in. The 3 champions, Fleur Delacour, Victor Crumb, and Cedric Diggory, were all exceptional. And then there was Harry Potter, the 4th unintended participant. His inclusion was the first sign that something was wrong. No underage student should have been able to bypass the age line. No 4th name should have emerged from the Goblet of Fire. The Goblet of Fire is an exceptionally powerful magical object, Dumbledore had said. It would take a powerful Confundus charm to hoodwink it. The fact that someone had done just that was an early alarm, one that many chose to ignore. Each of the tasks carried risks that in hindsight appear criminally irresponsible. facing dragons with little more than a wand and a strategy, diving into a black lake filled with grindylows and merpeople with gillyweed or incomplete transfiguration as the only means of survival. The final maze, which was supposed to test the champion's wits, became a labyrinth of curses, hexes, and dark manipulation. Victor Crumb was imperious. Cedric and Harry were lured to a graveyard. The line between competition and warfare was obliterated. It was not only the students who suffered. The reputations of the schools were damaged, perhaps irreparably. Beauxbatons and Durmstrang withdrew into silence after returning home. Madame Maxime would not discuss the matter in interviews, and Karkaroff fled entirely, unable to escape the fear that Voldemort's followers would seek him out. Only Hogwarts remained under the constant eye of the press, accused of negligence, favoritism, and corruption. There was no official ban after 1994, no signed decree like the one issued in 1792 when a cockatrice broke loose during a task and injured several judges. Instead, the schools quietly closed the doors. They stopped talking about future tournaments. The Goblet of Fire was stored away, and the cup itself was never recovered from the graveyard. It remained, perhaps symbolically, lost to darkness. Among academic circles, there are professors who speak of the Triwizard tournament with a certain reverence. To them, it was a noble concept. Professor Flitwick once described it as a beautiful tradition marred by centuries of hubris. He argued that magic, when practiced in peace, must also be celebrated, but others, like Madame Pomfrey, who tended to the champions after each task, saw only the scars left behind. "It's madness," she once said, "to treat children's lives as sport. Some believe that in time the Triwizard tournament may return. A generation who did not live through the Second Wizarding War may one day feel safe enough to revive old customs. There may be new enchantments, stricter safety rules, enchanted dummies instead of dragons. But it would be a ghost of the original, sanitized and performative. The danger, the real unflinching danger, was what made it both thrilling and horrifying. What often goes unmentioned is that the 1994 tournament was never completed. There was no closing ceremony, no celebration. The final act was Cedric's body appearing in the Hogwarts grounds, limp and lifeless. The students screamed. Fleur wept. Crumb stood in silence, stone-faced. Harry collapsed. It was Dumbledore who broke the silence. "He was murdered," he said, "not just to those gathered, but to the whole of Wizarding Britain." That sentence changed everything. Number 18, the first tournament ended in a tie, the Triwizard tournament, a name that conjures images of dragons, mermaids, and mazes shrouded in enchantments. Most remember it as a brutal, high-stakes competition that crowns a single champion, the bravest and most skilled among 3 wizarding schools. But buried in the folds of magical history lies a truth that few recall or even believe. The very first tournament, held in the year 1294, ended not with triumph for one, but with victory shared by 3. It was a conclusion so controversial, so unexpected, that it shook the very foundation of the tournament itself and shaped the rules that would endure for centuries. The setting was Château de Beaufort, an ancient, stone-walled fortress nestled within the shadowed valleys of eastern France. It was neutral ground chosen by the ministries of magic of France, Britain, and the northern kingdoms of the time. Durmstrang, Beauxbatons, and Hogwarts each sent one brave soul to represent their school in the first ever Triwizard tournament. The idea was as ambitious as it was risky, a friendly contest to promote international magical cooperation. But beneath the surface of noble intent, it was also a battle of pride. The 3 champions were among the finest young witches and wizards of their time. Edric Stormwield of Hogwarts, known for his calm demeanor and unmatched skills in transfiguration, was the son of a renowned magical historian. From Durmstrang came Katarina Volkova, fierce and quick, with a reputation for mastering the dark deterrence spells taught only in the deepest corners of her school's harsh northern curriculum. And, from Beauxbatons, Amandine Duvelet, elegant and precise, whose charm work had impressed even the French Minister of Magic at the time. The tasks had been devised with the intent to test not only magical strength, but cunning, cooperation, and moral judgment. It was said that the first challenge required the champions to descend into the ancient catacombs beneath Château de Beaufort, where a basilisk had been enchanted to remain hidden unless provoked. The goal was not to fight, but to retrieve a magical artifact from the catacombs without waking the beast. Amandine succeeded by charming the very stone to veil her steps. Edric transfigured a crawling root system into a decoy, diverting the creature's attention. Katerina used silence spells so precise that not even the basilisk sensed her presence. By the time of the third and final task, the judges were already murmuring that this tournament was too close to call. The challenge was a classic one, a magical maze filled with illusions, traps, and obstacles summoned by the greatest enchanters of the age. The champions were to retrieve the Cup of Concordance, a symbolic object representing the unity the tournament hoped to foster. What happened next was not written in any official record with complete certainty. Most accounts agree that the final moments were nothing short of legendary. As the sun dipped behind the mountains and cast elongated shadows across the hedge-bound labyrinth, all three champions approached the cup from different angles, each having defeated their own sequence of horrors. Edric had banished a boggart that had taken the form of a faceless woman whispering secrets he was terrified to hear. Katerina had braved a corridor of fear-inducing spells that turned every footstep into doubt. Amandine, they said, had walked through fire, not real flame, but enchanted memories of loss, extracted from her mind and replayed until she learned to let go. The Cup of Concordance shimmered at the center of the final glade, pulsing with white light. At nearly the exact same moment, all three reached out and touched it. The light exploded, casting a halo of gold over the glade and throwing the judges into chaos. The enchantments had been set to declare a winner based on magical contact, but three spells activated simultaneously. Three hands grasped the handle. The cup, confused by the magical conflict, cracked, not destroyed but fractured, as if split by the indecision of its own magic. The judges, one from each school, fell into heated debate. Hector McGonagall, great-uncle of the more famous Minerva and headmaster of Hogwarts at the time, declared Edric the true winner due to his ingenuity. Madame Mireille de Vaucluse of Beauxbatons, citing grace and mental clarity, insisted it had to be Amandine. High Warlock Boris Ivanov of Durmstrang pointed to Katerina's mental discipline and survivalist instincts. Days passed. Meetings were held behind closed doors. The magical community speculated in whispers and owlposts. Finally, a compromise was reached. The first and last time in Triwizard history, the tournament would crown three champions. It was a symbolic gesture that acknowledged the spirit of unity the cup had been designed to represent. But not all saw it that way. Critics howled. A columnist in the Daily Prophet, writing under the pseudonym Enobaria Greencloak, called the decision a disgraceful bow to sentiment over strength. The Durmstrang Herald accused the organizers of sabotaging the cup to avoid a Durmstrang victory. Even within Hogwarts, dissent festered. A competition without a winner is no competition at all, said one letter sent anonymously to the school's headmaster. The magical community was not just upset, they were divided. For centuries, wizards had revered the idea of singular greatness. The notion that three could share a title that was meant to define the best rang hollow to many. The Ministry of Magic in Britain issued a statement declaring it would urge for rule revisions in the event of future tournaments. Similar statements echoed across the continent. The rule revisions came swiftly. By the next Triwizard tournament, held in 1303, the cup had been redesigned. New enchantments were added to ensure it would only activate for a single touch. If two or more champions approached at once, the maze would generate additional obstacles, delaying all but one. From that point on, ambiguity was outlawed. There would be one champion, always. The first tournament, however, remained a ghost in the records. A curious event, spoken of in academic circles, whispered about by goblets of firelight in Hogwarts common rooms, but never again repeated. Yet it was not forgotten. Even centuries later, Albus Dumbledore would reference it subtly when explaining the tournament's dangers. "Magic," he once said, "is not always fair, nor should it be asked to be." In truth, that first tournament revealed something deeper than skill. It showed that even the best rules could falter when met with greatness in equal measure. The three champions went on to lead very different lives. Edric Stormwield became a professor at Hogwarts, revered for his work on transmutational ethics. Amandine du Velay retreated from public life, reportedly dedicating herself to healing magic and botanical studies. Katarina Volkova returned to Durmstrang and later founded the Institute for Magical Resilience, a facility that still trains witches and wizards in overcoming mental magic attacks. Each of them wore the title of Triwizard champion with quiet dignity, but never again did they appear together in public. The fractured Cup of Concordance was quietly retired, placed in a vault deep beneath the Department of Magical Games and Sports. It was said to hum faintly when approached by those of great magical promise. Some even claimed it whispered their names. The story remains relevant not just because of what it says about magical competition, but because of what it reveals about the wizarding world's reluctance to accept ambiguity. The magical world thrives on structure, houses, bloodlines, ranks. A shared victory was an affront to this rigid order. It suggested that there were moments when magic itself refused to choose. During the 1994 tournament, when Cedric Diggory and Harry Potter touched the cup at once, some older members of the department recalled the ancient precedent. "It's happened before," one unnamed official was quoted in The Prophet as saying, "but that time the cup was a portkey, and its split activation led to tragedy." Cedric's death and the rise of Lord Voldemort overshadowed any symbolic echo of the past. Still, the coincidence is unsettling. Two moments in history when more than one wizard touched the cup, both ending in consequences that could not be undone. Perhaps the Cup of Concordance was not simply confused that day in 1294. Perhaps it was warning them that not all victories are meant to be shared, that sometimes magic hesitates for a reason. And yet there are scholars who argue that the first tournament represents something beautiful, a time when unity, however briefly, triumphed over rivalry. Professor Batilda Bagshot wrote in an early edition of A History of Magic, "The 1294 tournament was the only time we truly honoured the cup's name." Indeed, what better symbol of magical concord could there be than three champions, equally great, reaching one object together? The Triwizard tournament continues to this day, albeit infrequently, and with safeguards born from centuries of hard-earned lessons. But somewhere, locked behind enchanted doors and forgotten by most, the fractured Cup of Concordance waits, its glow faded, but its story not yet over. It remains a silent witness to the one-time magic refused to choose a favourite. And in that refusal perhaps lies its greatest magic of all. Number 19. The Goblet awakens every 5 years. The Goblet of Fire, a nondescript, ancient-looking chalice locked away in the bowels of Hogwarts, is no mere ceremonial relic. At a glance it appears simple, carved from a block of age-darkened wood, faintly glowing with the whisper of past enchantments. But to those who study magical history, its importance is immeasurable. For centuries, this object has been the cornerstone of one of the most dangerous and revered magical competitions in wizarding history, the Triwizard Tournament. It is said that once every 5 years, the goblet does not simply accept names, it awakens. The flame that usually lies dormant within its heart begins to shimmer in hues of pale, magical blue, and the entire castle seems to hum faintly in anticipation. It's not just the physical fire that changes. Professors in the Department of Mysteries have long argued that the goblet resonates with something deeper, a frequency that aligns with the magical core of living beings. In the weeks leading to the tournament, when the goblet is brought out from its locked chamber, its aura pulses faintly. Some wizards claim they feel an itch in their fingertips as they approach it, as though their wands recognize something ancient, something watching. Even Dumbledore, who had overseen more magical phenomena than perhaps any living wizard, treated the goblet with an odd reverence. "The Goblet of Fire," he once stated before a hushed crowd in the Great Hall, is an impartial judge, a living artifact, and like all such objects, it sees more than we know. There is something particularly unnerving about how the goblet reacts to proximity. Students at Hogwarts in the weeks before the tournament often whisper about the strange way its flame seems to lean toward individuals, sometimes subtly, other times with a distinct flicker, as if it were tasting the air around them. In 1994, Cedric Diggory, the chosen Hogwarts champion, stood beside the goblet for only a moment before its flame danced brighter. Some noted the blue light deepened into a sapphire shade the instant he stepped forward. It's as if the artifact responded not only to his name, but to the very essence of who he was, brave, just, and pure of heart. But the true mystery of the goblet lies in its selectivity. It is not a mere receptacle for slips of parchment. It reads what is written and weighs it, not by words, but by something unseen. Only those who are truly worthy, Ludo Bagman explained, during a press conference before the 1994 tournament, will be chosen. The goblet does not make mistakes. That statement, of course, aged poorly, for the goblet's so-called infallibility came into question the moment it selected a fourth name, Harry Potter. Harry's inclusion was not simply unexpected, it was impossible. The goblet was bound by powerful enchantments created by Dumbledore and other high-ranking officials to prevent underage students from entering. Harry was 14. He had not submitted his name. Yet, in front of hundreds, the goblet flared once more and released a fourth piece of parchment. Harry Potter, written in an unfamiliar hand. The hall erupted into stunned silence. For the first time in recorded history, the goblet had defied its own rules. Theories swirled instantly. Some claimed Harry had found a loophole. Others whispered about dark magic. But the truth, as later revealed, was far more sinister. Barty Crouch Jr., under the guise of Mad-Eye Moody, had manipulated the goblet using a confundus charm. By tricking the artifact into believing that Harry was the only contestant from a non-existent fourth school, he ensured Harry's selection. And yet, even under such duress, the goblet accepted the ruse, which begged a troubling question. Can the goblet be deceived, or did it choose to be? To understand the nature of the goblet, one must look to its origin. Though its precise creation is lost to time, some magical historians believe it was crafted by a conclave of European sorcerers during the early 11th century. The enchantments woven into its grain were not simple spells, but binding magic, similar in complexity to the enchantments placed on the Sorting Hat. The goblet is not sentient in the human sense, but it possesses awareness. It reads intention, measures character, and most chillingly reacts to will. Consider the timing of its activation. Though the tournament is a planned event, the goblet's flame begins to stir before it is even touched by human hands. Professor Vector once noted that the flame appeared 3 days before the goblet was unveiled in 1994, long before any name was submitted. "It knows," she murmured, watching the blue light flicker in the gloom. "It always knows when the time is near." The notion that the goblet possesses a form of magical empathy is not new. Ancient runic texts from Durmstrang speak of a vessel that drinks the breath of bravery and exhales challenge. A more poetic interpretation, perhaps, but not inaccurate. When Victor Crumb approached the goblet, it remained perfectly still. Only when he extended his hand and spoke softly in Bulgarian, a ritual gesture from his school's tradition, did the flame ripple in acknowledgement. Similarly, Fleur Delacour's presence was marked by a soft brightening, as if the goblet was curious, cautious even, before accepting her submission. But the true anomaly remained Harry. Unlike the others, the goblet did not react to his presence with anticipation. There was no flicker when he walked into the hall, no glow when he sat among his peers. Only when the final name burst forth did anyone suspect it had even registered him at all. And yet it had. Somehow, somewhere deep in its core, the goblet had accepted Harry Potter. Either it had been fooled entirely, or it had, terrifyingly, allowed itself to be. What makes this event even more unsettling is the goblet's reaction to interference. Magical artifacts often resist tampering. The Marauder's map, for instance, hides itself from anyone it deems unworthy. Wands reject owners who do not match their allegiance. But the goblet? It did not fight. The Confundus charm placed upon it should have caused a magical backlash. Instead, it complied. This passivity has led some unspeakables to suggest that the goblet, like prophecy, sometimes leans toward destiny, even if that destiny is orchestrated by dark hands. Hermione Granger, after researching magical artifacts for the Department of Magical Law Enforcement years later, penned an unofficial paper titled Conscious Constructs, the Ethereal Minds of Magical Objects. In it, she speculates that the goblet's decision to accept Harry might have been more than confusion. Perhaps, she writes, the goblet perceived Harry's future as vital to the tournament's purpose. It did not judge his age or question his will. It saw the soul, and that soul was ready. Such a perspective reframes the incident not as an accident, but a decision made by something ancient and aware. The implications of this are vast. If the goblet can sense magical potential, does it also sense corruption? Could it be that it allowed Harry in because it sensed the coming storm, the rebirth of Voldemort? After all, the tournament of 1994 ended not with fanfare, but with death. Cedric Diggory was killed. Lord Voldemort returned. The goblet, whether knowingly or not, had set in motion one of the most significant chains of events in modern magical history. After the incident, the goblet was locked away again, its flame extinguished, its wooden frame returned to dormancy. But even in sleep it seems to pulse faintly, a pale glow beneath layers of darkness. It is said that when Filch walks past its chamber, his cat, Mrs. Norris, refuses to follow, and on the coldest nights the hallway outside the chamber is a few degrees warmer than the rest of the castle, almost as though something within still breathes. And then there is the rhythm. Magical artifacts, when deeply bound to rituals, often operate in cycles. The Triwizard tournament is held only once every 5 years. Why? Not simply for safety or tradition, but because the goblet itself takes time to recover. Ancient scripts found in the vaults of Beauxbatons mention the chalice needing 4 turns of the moon multiplied by seasons' strength to fully regenerate its magical core. In modern terms, 5 years. A slumber not of sleep, but of restoration. The last recorded instance of the goblet stirring was in 1999, though no tournament was held. Witnesses report that it flared for a single evening before quieting again. This, many believe, was a false awakening, a residual echo of the chaos surrounding Voldemort's final fall. The goblet had sensed something stirring in the magical world and responded. It is moments like these that remind scholars how little they truly understand the old magic. Indeed, old magic is at the heart of the goblet's mystery, not the polished spellwork of today, but the wild primal magic that predates wands, magic that listens, that feels, magic that remembers. The goblet, with its wooden shell and eternal flame, may not speak, but it communicates in its own way, through flickers, through selections, through silence. And so it waits, beneath stone, behind wards, in a vault lined with anti-tampering hexes and watched by more charms than most vaults at Gringotts. The goblet does not stir for fame, nor for spectacle. It wakes only for worth, for challenge, for fate. The next time it burns, the world may once again tremble. Number 20, Beauxbatons had its own Hall of Fame. Beauxbatons Academy of Magic has long been a place of elegance, refinement, and deep-rooted magical traditions. Nestled in the Pyrenees, the school's very walls seem to breathe an air of sophistication. But among all the customs upheld by Beauxbatons, few were as revered and as symbolically powerful as the Hall of Champions, an ornate chamber devoted entirely to the memory of the school's past Triwizard tournament champions. Though long lost to time and flame, this hall once pulsed with the echoes of triumph, honor, and, inevitably, tragedy. From the moment the Triwizard tournament was conceived in the 13th century, Beauxbatons approached it not as a brutal competition, but as an artistic celebration of magical mastery. Every student chosen to represent the school was immortalized, not simply through written record, but through portraiture. Living, speaking, enchanted portraits that graced the Hall of Champions like wise ghosts of glory past. These portraits were not static images, but magically endowed reflections of their subjects' personalities and memories, created through a rare branch of spellwork, practiced only by a few of Beauxbatons' most skilled magical artisans. The portraits lined the cerulean walls of a domed room crowned with chandeliers of enchanted crystal. They whispered in French, English, and sometimes in Romanian or Icelandic, depending on the champion's heritage. Visitors to the hall would often stand in awe as champions from centuries past recounted tales of dragons faced, riddles solved, or spells miscast in the haze of youthful ambition. We weren't merely competing, one would say. We were etching our courage into history. The oldest surviving record of this tradition mentions a champion named Iseline Dumaret, who represented Beauxbatons in the 1292 tournament. Iseline, known for her unusual command over nature magic, faced the infamous forest maze task, which had been enchanted to twist and rearrange itself. According to her portrait, which stood beside the portrait of her contemporary from Durmstrang, she sang ancient druidic incantations that caused the thorns to part and lead her to the center. "A song for the roots," she would often say to admiring students who visited the hall. Even the wildest brambles bow before a gentle voice. Each portrait was more than a tribute. It was a magical archive infused with pieces of a champion's memories. They were able to describe spells they used, speak about strategic decisions, and even share the emotions they felt in the heat of danger. One particularly moving example was the portrait of Léonard de Roquemont, the Beauxbatons champion of 1467, whose final task involved a lake infested with shape-shifting kelpies. Léonard, who had lost his younger brother to drowning years before, revealed how he overcame his own terror by remembering the kindness of his brother's laughter. His voice cracked whenever he told the story, even in painted form. Students, professors, and visitors from abroad would often spend hours within the hall, listening to these immortalized champions. There was no greater honor for a Beauxbatons student than to be chosen as the school's champion, for it meant not only glory in the present, but eternal remembrance. To be painted was to live forever, wrote Madame Lafeu, a headmistress from the 17th century, in one of her letters to the Ministry of Magic. Our champions walk with us, speak with us, they never leave. The spellcraft behind these living portraits was as intricate as the champion's own journeys. It required not just a magical painting, but a ritualistic process involving memory capture, a fragment of the person's wand, and a rare blue phoenix feather ink imported from Tibet. The process took several weeks, and the subject had to participate willingly, sharing their memories and emotions with the artist. It was said that some champions cried during the process, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of being asked to relive their most harrowing moments. By the mid-18th century, the Hall of Champions had grown to contain nearly 60 portraits. Some were large and grand, depicting champions with their wands raised or caught mid-spell. Others were more subdued, showing them seated in moments of reflection. All had the ability to speak and to remember, not always clearly, but always emotionally. But in 1793, disaster struck. It began with a demonstration gone wrong. A young instructor, Marcelin Durand, known for his experimental charm work, attempted to showcase a new method for controlling elemental fire before a group of staff and students. He had hoped to create a spell that could be used for controlled burns in magical herbology fields. Instead, the flame escaped his wand and latched onto the ancient cedar rafters of the East Wing, the wing that housed the Hall of Champions. Fire in a magical building is never ordinary. The blaze twisted into fantastical shapes, howled with unnatural intensity, and consumed even enchanted stone. Witnesses described the moment as a waking nightmare. The protective enchantments on the hall were powerful, but the very magic that allowed the portraits to speak and think also made them vulnerable to disruption. The flames didn't just burn the canvas, they unraveled the magic itself, unmaking decades and even centuries of memory and presence. Out of the 60 portraits, only 4 survived. The rest were reduced to ash and echoes. A few students claimed they heard the portraits scream as the fire reached them. Whether this was a psychological hallucination or a magical side effect remains unknown. The school was devastated. No loss of student life occurred, but to the Beauxbatons community, the destruction of the hall was akin to losing family. One of the few rescued portraits was that of Emilienne Rousseau, the champion of 1605, whose quick wit and charm had once made her the darling of the wizarding elite. After the fire, Emilienne's portrait was moved to the library, where it remained silent for over a year. It was only after careful restorative spellwork that she finally whispered again. "It hurts to remember what was," she said. "They are gone, and I speak alone." The emotional toll on the school was immense. Students wept openly in the courtyard, professors wore mourning robes for weeks, and headmistress Clarisse de Rosier made a controversial decision: the hall would never be rebuilt. "To rebuild it would be to desecrate the memory of what we lost," she declared. "Let the ashes speak louder than any new brushstroke." With that, the surviving portraits were moved to individual locations within the school, and the magical rituals for living portraiture were officially discontinued. To this day, no new Beauxbatons champion has been immortalized in magical paint. When Fleur Delacour was chosen in 1994 to represent Beauxbatons in the renewed Triwizard tournament, she was not given the offer of a portrait. Though the Ministry's revival of the tournament carried a tone of pageantry, Beauxbatons retained a reserved air, touched still by the memory of its own lost legends. Fleur, proud and noble, understood the weight of the past. "I carry them with me," she told headmistress Maxime before departing for Hogwarts. "Even if their faces are gone, their fire remains." This quiet reverence stands in stark contrast to the traditions of Durmstrang and Hogwarts, which honor their champions through trophies and banners. Beauxbatons had chosen silence and memory over spectacle. In this, they carved a unique identity, a school that understood that true greatness often lies not in victory, but in the stories left behind. Scholars have debated whether the fire was truly accidental. Some have speculated that darker forces within the wizarding world sought to erase records of certain champions whose bloodlines or beliefs later became controversial. The name of Antoine Verdun, a 17th century champion known for his ties to a renegade magical sect, often surfaces in such discussions. But no evidence has ever confirmed these theories, and the official record still attributes the fire to Durand's miscalculation. Yet for those who walk the quiet halls of Beauxbatons today, the loss of the Hall of Champions is more than a historical footnote. It is a ghost story, a lesson, a scar hidden beneath layers of polished marble and candlelight. Some students say that on certain winter nights, if you listen closely near the east wing, you can still hear faint voices calling out, names, spells, laughter, trapped in a moment that magic could not preserve. And so, the legacy of Beauxbatons lives not in enchanted portraits, but in the memories passed from student to student, in whispered stories under starlit skies, and in the unshakable sense that to be chosen as a champion of this noble academy means more than triumph. It means responsibility to those who came before. It means carrying a legacy born in fire, silence, and unyielding honor. Number 21. Muggle-borns rarely took part. In the long and often treacherous history of the Triwizard tournament, one detail has quietly lingered in the shadows, an unspoken truth veiled beneath the glitter of fame and the glamour of magical prowess. Though the rules proclaimed open participation to all witches and wizards above the age of 17, in practice, a different pattern emerged. Nearly all champions came from pure blood or, at most, half-blood families. The Magler-born, those born to non-magical parents, remained strikingly absent from the ranks of contenders, not by decree, but by something far more insidious: expectation. The Triwizard tournament, resurrected in 1994 after a century of dormancy due to its dangerous nature, stood as one of the most celebrated magical competitions in Europe. Beauxbatons, Durmstrang, and Hogwarts, the three great magical institutions, each sent forth their best. It was a test not only of magical ability, but of courage, intelligence, and instinct. And yet, beneath the surface of fair competition, a quiet segregation lingered, deeply ingrained in the magical world's traditions. From the moment the Goblet of Fire was lit, a subtle tension crept into the atmosphere at Hogwarts. Students gathered in the Great Hall, whispering names and speculating over likely champions. It was the names with lineage, the ones steeped in magical heritage, that dominated the conversation. Cedric Diggory, the Hufflepuff heartthrob, with a proud, wizarding lineage; Fleur Delacour, a descendant of the Vila and raised in a magical family with elegance and pride; Victor Krum, already a Bulgarian Quidditch legend, from a Durmstrang background where magical bloodlines were fiercely protected. Their selection felt inevitable, even predestined. No one questioned why students like Hermione Granger never entered their names. Hermione, the brightest witch of her age, had already displayed a level of magical proficiency that few in her year could match. She had brewed Polyjuice Potion in second year, mastered advanced spells before most were introduced in class, and could match her professors in theory and application, but her name was never whispered as a potential champion. When the goblet's blue flames flickered and the names were drawn, there was no space in anyone's imagination for a Muggle-born victor. The culture within magical schools fostered these expectations. While not formally discouraged, Muggle-born students internalized the message. Participation in the tournament was for those who fit the mold of magical tradition. Even Albus Dumbledore, with all his progressive values, did not address the underlying divide when he introduced the tournament. There was no encouragement directed toward the less represented. The silence, though subtle, was deafening. The history of the tournament reveals the same pattern. Its origins trace back to the 13th century, a time when magical bloodlines were guarded with religious fervor. Back then, even half-bloods were met with suspicion. Only the most ancient families, those with grim portraits and dusty tomes lining their ancestral manors, sent forth their heirs to claim glory. Magleborns were either rare or disregarded, depending on the era's temperament. It wasn't until the 20th century that the first confirmed participation of a Muggle-born was documented. That participant, a young witch named Clara Melford from Hogwarts, entered the Goblet in 1923. The event was hosted at Beauxbatons, and Clara was the only British student even considered a contender that year. Her selection was met with outrage from certain quarters. Letters flooded the Daily Prophet, some decrying the desecration of sacred traditions. Others questioned whether she had manipulated the goblet through unnatural means. An affront to wizardkind, one reader wrote. Clara ultimately did not survive the second task, drowned in the Black Lake while attempting to free her hostage. Some whispered that she had been sabotaged. Despite the tragedy, her participation cracked a long, untouched foundation. Over the following decades, other Magleborn students began to test the waters. Still none emerged victorious. In 1956, Lajos Takács, a Hungarian student from Durmstrang, born to a non-magical seamstress and a squib father, made it through the first two tasks. He withdrew before the third, citing personal reasons. Behind closed doors, it was said that the pressure and whispers had become unbearable. The stigma, it seemed, persisted. Champions were celebrated, yes, but only if they matched a certain image. Magleborns who dared enter often faced scrutiny that their peers did not. Even within Hogwarts, where integration of Muggle-born students was more accepted than in Durmstrang, the internal culture echoed the past. Students like Dean Thomas and Seamus Finnegan never considered the tournament as something within their grasp. It belonged, silently but clearly, to the heirs of legacy. Harry Potter's entry into the tournament in 1994 caused its own firestorm, not only because he was underage and his name had been submitted without consent, but because he was not fully of pure blood. His mother, Lily Evans, was a Muggle-born. Though Harry himself was famous for other reasons, his bloodline placed him outside the traditional mold. This detail was often glossed over, but it mattered. In the old traditions, even a drop of Muggle heritage could tarnish a family's standing. That Harry was accepted, cheered, and eventually won the tournament marked a turning point, not just for safety protocols or inter-school unity, but for heritage representation. The Goblet of Fire, in its strange, magical impartiality, had chosen him. Dumbledore once said, "It matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be." Yet in the eyes of many, what one is born has continued to shape their opportunities. Harry's win, however, proved that magical ability and courage were not the property of bloodlines. It was a symbolic fracture in the long-standing wall. Still, even after Harry's victory, change was slow. Magler-born participation remained sparse. In a 1998 interview with The Quibbler, Padma Patil noted, "The tournament still feels like it's for the elites. Even after everything, we don't see people like us in that circle." When the tournament was restructured in the 2010s with new safety rules and a broader inclusivity push, more diverse names began to emerge. One of the first champions of this era was Nia Okonjo from Beauxbatons, a Nigerian-French Muggle-born student who dazzled judges with her charm work and exceptional memory in the second task. Her victory in 2013 was described by the Daily Prophet as a breath of fresh air in a tournament gasping for relevance. The shift was not just cultural, but visual. Portraits in the trophy room at Hogwarts began to reflect the changing face of magical achievement, where once every face was pale, noble, and surnamed after ancient houses, now came champions like Mateo Alvarez, a Mexican-born Muggle-raised wizard who trained in Ilvermorny before transferring to Hogwarts for a cultural exchange program. His participation in the 2020 tournament was cheered by students of every house. And yet, even with progress, scars remained. Many still recall how Hermione Granger, with all her intellect and strength, never once seemed tempted to compete. Her sense of justice was unparalleled, but she had absorbed early on that the tournament was a different kind of battle, one that went beyond tasks and monsters, one fought in whispers and judgment. Fear of a name increases fear of the thing itself, Dumbledore had once warned. But what of fear of legacy, fear of rejection? The Goblet, in theory, asked only for skill and intent, but the atmosphere around it asked for lineage. In the quiet pauses before names were drawn, students looked to the banners of families they recognized, families like the Crouches, the Malfoys, the Lestranges. When Harry's name emerged from the flames, his lack of pure blood status was not his defining trait, but it was whispered nonetheless. Some called it a flaw in the magic, others a prank. Few believed it could have been a legitimate selection. This reveals a deeper truth about the magical world. Magic, as raw power, may not discriminate, but the societies that use it often do. The Triwizard tournament, with its glorious history and pageantry, was a mirror not just of skill, but of the values of the time. What it reflected was often uncomfortable, but in rare cases it showed glimpses of change. Today, young witches and wizards of all blood statuses are more likely to believe in their worth. The Great Hall, during the lighting of the Goblet, now echoes with a broader chorus of excitement. The silence once held by Magler-born students has cracked, and while the weight of history still looms, so too does the promise of something better. In this changing world, the stories of those who dared, Clara Melford, Lajos Takach, Nia Okonjo, and even Harry Potter, stand as quiet rebellions. Not against the rules, but against the expectations behind them. They remind us that the measure of a champion lies not in blood, but in bravery. And perhaps one day, when the Goblet flares to life again, and the name of a young Magler-born student emerges from its blue fire, the hall will no longer fall silent. Instead, it will erupt in applause, not because it's a rarity, but because it's finally become normal. Number 22. Some tournaments had team tasks. The Triwizard tournament, often remembered for its deadly tasks and the solitary courage of its champions, has not always been as individualistic as the 1994 edition would suggest. Although the tasks faced by Harry Potter, Cedric Diggory, Fleur Delacour, and Victor Crumb in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire were designed to isolate and test each competitor's singular strength, magical knowledge, and courage, history tells a more complex tale. There was a time, deep in the ancient roots of this legendary competition, when teamwork was not only permitted, it was required. The year was 1512, during what came to be known as one of the most controversial yet innovative Triwizard tournaments ever recorded. Held at Castelo Bruxo, the Brazilian wizarding school, nestled within the heart of the Amazon rainforest. The competition drew not only the best champions from Beauxbatons, Durmstrang and Hogwarts, but also the keen interest of the wider magical world. The tournament that year included a task that would come to be whispered about for generations: the hostage rescue in the enchanted forest. The forest was no ordinary wood. It was a sentient, shifting landscape, a place that responded to fear, trust, and betrayal. The task required champions to enter the forest in pairs, an unorthodox decision at the time, but one rooted in the desire to challenge cooperation, a skill often lost in the traditional glory-driven tournament. Each pair was assigned the same mission: to locate and safely retrieve a magically hidden hostage, someone emotionally important to one or both of the competitors. From Hogwarts, 2 champions were selected: Elidora Madley, a prodigy in transfiguration, and Humphrey Jorkins, whose talent for care of magical creatures bordered on the obsessive. They were known not to be close friends, which made them an unusual pairing. From Durmstrang came Olaf Karkaroff, rumoured to be the great-great-granduncle of Igor, and his companion, Margit Alenko, a cunning illusionist. Beauxbatons' pair, meanwhile, included the fiercely analytical Celeste Dufontaine and the duelist Etienne Marchand, whose pride in his own skill made him a less-than-ideal teammate. The forest task commenced at dawn. The champions were led blindfolded into the outer perimeter of the enchanted woods and left to find their way. From the start, the task demanded trust. Each competitor held a magically bound rope connecting them to their partner. If either tried to abandon the other, the rope would constrict and paralyze them both. "Only united shall you walk, and only united shall you win," declared the enchantment etched on the forest's entrance arch, according to transcripts held at the Department of Magical Games and Sports. Elidora and Humphrey entered with caution. Their rope tugged gently as they moved in hesitant coordination. The air inside the forest was heavy with enchantments, illusions of friends calling out, boggart-like visions and flora that whispered secrets in voices eerily familiar. Elidora conjured spectral arrows to mark their path, while Humphrey calmed the trees, many of which were guardians with ancient awareness. "This is not a task of strength," Elidora would later write in a letter to Headmistress Damocles Roll. "This is a test of patience, of synergy. Alone I might have attacked. With Humphrey I listened." The Beauxbatons pair fared differently. Etienne, ever the lone wolf, repeatedly tried to yank the rope to assert direction. Celeste, exasperated but determined, used her illusions to mislead predators, but the lack of cooperation showed. "They screamed at each other more than once," one judge later wrote. At one point, Etienne attempted to slice the rope, nearly dooming them both. Meanwhile, Olaf and Margit displayed surprising synchronicity. Though Durmstrang was often associated with brutal magic, these two utilized tactical silence. Margit summoned whisper owls that scouted in silence, while Olaf relied on Nordic runes that glowed when near the hostage. Their synergy made them the first to reach the clearing, where the hostages were held, suspended mid-air by vines that responded only to joint spells. The true test, however, came when it was revealed that only one pair would be allowed to bring back their hostage. The first to free theirs would trigger the magical collapse of the enchantments protecting the others. This design was intentional. It tested whether teammates could make swift, selfless decisions under pressure. Olaf and Margit hesitated. Their hostage was Margit's younger brother, unconscious and weeping. But Margit faltered. Her magic wavered. "We will wait," Olaf reportedly muttered. "The others deserve the chance." Elidora and Humphrey arrived minutes later. The vines had grown thicker. A quick decision had to be made. Their hostage was an elderly man, Humphrey's mentor, Professor Emmerich Tealeaf. He was conscious but unable to speak. Elidora took the lead, casting a series of transmutations on the vines, while Humphrey protected the clearing. They worked in silence, in sync. and within moments the vines released the hostage into their arms. As predicted, the collapse began. Trees groaned, the sky above the forest shimmered with purple light, and the other hostages, still dangling, were gently lowered by vines that became inert. The spell had been designed to prevent death, but not disappointment. Olaf and Margit returned, silent but with dignity. Celeste and Etienne arrived last, dirty, wounded, and, according to observers, no longer on speaking terms. The Ministry's official records called the task a powerful experiment in magical collaboration, but also noted its failures. In testing teamwork, the report read, we tested character, and in testing character we found more than we bargained for. The Durmstrang pair had demonstrated valor, but not victory. The Beauxbatons pair had revealed the dangers of ego, and the Hogwarts pair, Elidora and Humphrey, had won not just because of their magical ability, but because they trusted when it was least convenient to do so. Yet the controversy did not end there. Some critics argued that rewarding a team in a tournament meant to identify a champion blurred the lines of purpose. "This is not the Duo Wizard tournament," scoffed Winstanley Gudgeon in the Daily Prophet. "To elevate two is to diminish both." Others disagreed. "What is a wizard without his community?" countered Lady Mirabella Plunkett in a rare public statement. "To stand alone is not always to be strong." Despite such arguments, the task was never repeated. By 1558, the official rulebook, and then updated by the International Confederation of Wizards, firmly prohibited team-based challenges. The reasoning? Simplicity, safety, and spectacle. The tournament must produce one victor, the new guidelines stated, and that victor must triumph by their own merit. The rope enchantment was archived, the enchanted forest charm dismantled, and the idea of magical collaboration in the Triwizard tournament became, once again, legend. Still, traces of that fateful year remain. Hogwarts' trophy case, rarely visited by students, holds a joint medal with the names Elidora Madley and Humphrey Jorkins engraved in tiny gold letters. The medal is shaped like two hands clasped in wandless unity. Its inscription reads, "For bravery shared." Students often mistake it for a dueling trophy. Few know its origin. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Dumbledore speaks to the school after Cedric Diggory's death. He says, "Remember, Cedric. Remember if the time should come when you have to make a choice between what is right and what is easy." It is hard not to think of that forest, of Olaf Karkaroff choosing to wait, of Margit Alenko choosing not to act alone. They lost, yes, but they remembered what was right. The team task of 1512 is now a footnote in history. It exists in dusty tomes and neglected scrolls, in journals held within the restricted section of the Hogwarts library. And yet it offers something that no solo task ever could, a reminder that courage is often quiet, cooperation is often braver than combat, and magic at its core is a bond, not a weapon. What if the 1994 tournament had included such a task? One can only wonder how Harry and Cedric might have fared had they been forced to work together earlier. Would the tragedy have been averted? Would trust have grown before it was too late? The Triwizard tournament as it stands is a crucible for the individual. But magic was never meant to be practiced in isolation. Wands were made to duel, yes, but also to unite. The hostage rescue in the Enchanted Forest remains one of the few examples in Triwizard history where the outcome depended less on who cast the strongest spell and more on who understood another's strength. It was a brief moment when the tournament became not a battlefield, but a mirror, revealing not just what kind of witches and wizards the champions were, but what kind of people they chose to be. And perhaps that is why it was discontinued, yet the forest remembers. The magic lingers, as it always does, in the spaces where wizards dared to trust one another, and dared to win, not by stepping forward alone, but by walking side by side into the dark. Number 23. Dragons were not always used. The Triwizard tournament, a competition shrouded in mystery and peril, has always captivated the magical world with its high stakes and deadly challenges. Most fans remember the awe-inspiring scene in the 1994 tournament when Harry Potter faced the Hungarian Horntail in the first task. It was a moment that burned itself into the collective memory of readers and viewers alike. But dragons, despite their grandeur, were not always part of the tournament's design. In fact, throughout the long and storied history of the Triwizard tournament, dragons were used in only 7 out of more than 100 editions. Dragons, for all their majesty and thrill, come with serious complications. They are difficult to control, extremely dangerous even to seasoned handlers, and require extensive resources to secure, feed, and transport. The Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures has long expressed concerns about their use in public spectacles. As early as 1792, when a cockatrice escaped during the tournament and injured several judges, the ministry debated whether magical creatures of such magnitude should be allowed at all. Though that creature was not a dragon, the incident cast a long shadow over the use of dangerous beasts in general. The 1792 Triwizard tournament, hosted by Beauxbatons Academy, is often cited as one of the earliest instances where a dragon was considered for use. Ultimately, the planners opted instead for a basilisk-themed illusion in the first task, enchanted with layers of protective magic to simulate real danger without placing the champions in mortal peril. According to the memoirs of Claudine Larue, a former Beauxbatons headmistress, it was deemed unwise to subject students to the fury of a real beast, however magnificent it may be. Her account provides a rare glimpse into the caution that often ruled the tournament's earlier years. When dragons did make their debut, it was during the infamous 1875 tournament held at Durmstrang Institute. That year, the organizers, perhaps eager to impress, or to cement Durmstrang's reputation for fearlessness, procured a Welsh green for the first task. The dragon was housed in a reinforced stone arena with layers of anti-apparition and shielding spells cast around it. The first champion, Ingrid Malik of Durmstrang, was severely burned despite wearing protective gear. The dragon, agitated by the crowd's cheers, accidentally scorched 2 spectators before being subdued. The incident prompted a 3-year suspension of the tournament. Still, dragons returned. There was something irresistible about their power. Magical historians like Bathilda Bagshot have speculated that their inclusion was as much about appealing to the audience's appetite for spectacle as it was about testing the champions. The tournament has always walked a dangerous line between valor and voyeurism, she once wrote in a footnote in A History of Magic. Her words ring especially true when examining the 1902 tournament, where 3 different species of dragon were used in 3 separate tasks, a bold but ultimately tragic decision. That year, held in the Highlands of Scotland near the old wizarding town of Dunleith, the tournament became a bloodbath. A Chinese fireball, intended to serve as the final task's guardian, broke through its magical enclosure and caused catastrophic damage to the arena. One champion, Elwyn March from Hogwarts, was mortally wounded, and a 4th-year student volunteering with the logistics team lost an arm. The event sent shockwaves through the magical world, prompting a complete review of tournament regulations. The use of dragons was suspended for nearly half a century afterward. Not all instances of dragon use ended in catastrophe. The 1956 tournament, remembered fondly for its flawless execution, featured a single Romanian longhorn in a controlled mountain range setting. Thanks to breakthroughs in magical restraint charms developed by Otto Grimble, a magi zoologist from the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, the event proceeded without injury. The 3 champions, Lysandra Quinn, Beauxbatons, Henrik Voort, Durmstrang, and Malcolm Priwet, Hogwarts, each demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in their approach to retrieving a golden egg guarded by the dragon. Priwet's strategy of creating a swarm of magical moths to distract the creature is still studied at Hogwarts as an example of clever, non-violent spellwork. The magical community tends to forget these quieter, more measured successes. The shadow of violence always looms large in collective memory, and the dramatic moments, like Harry Potter's near-death encounter with the Horntail, overshadow the more nuanced chapters of the tournament's past. The 1994 tournament, hosted again at Hogwarts, marked the return of dragons after a long absence, Ludo Bagman, then head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, championed their inclusion despite strong objections from the Department of Magical Creatures. People want excitement, he had argued, and nothing says excitement like dragons. The inclusion of the Hungarian horntail, Swedish short snout, Chinese fireball, and common Welsh green was coordinated with help from the Dragon Research and Restraint Bureau. The logistics involved were staggering. 4 dragons, each with different temperaments, transported secretly to Hogwarts grounds, housed in separate enclosures, constantly monitored by a team of handlers and charmed with sleep-inducing spells until the task began. Charlie Weasley, working with the Bureau at the time, later said in a letter home, "It's a miracle none of us was scorched before the tournament even started." What made the 1994 use of dragons so iconic was not only the danger they represented, but the ingenuity it demanded of the champions. Each had to retrieve a golden egg from their assigned dragon using only their wand and wits. Harry's use of the summoning charm to call his firebolt remains one of the most adrenaline-charged moments in the series. As Hermione Granger later recalled, "He made it look easy, but that was the kind of courage you don't teach. You either have it or you don't." Yet, even then, critics questioned the morality of using dragons. Magical animal rights activists like Andromeda Lasker of the group Wands Down pointed out that all 4 dragons were pregnant females, chosen for their aggressive tendencies and instinct to protect. They were set up to fail, and so were the champions, Lasker wrote in her editorial in the Daily Prophet. This isn't testing skill, it's manufacturing chaos. The argument draws attention to a deeper truth. The tournament has always reflected the values of its time. In eras of political tension, organizers favored mental duels and riddle-based challenges. For example, the 1931 tournament held in Prague featured a sprawling underground maze filled with shifting illusions and false memories rather than any living creature. It was praised for its elegance and complexity, and no champion was harmed. Even more intellectually focused was the 1843 tournament at Beauxbatons, where the first task involved decoding an enchanted manuscript written in a forgotten magical dialect. The text slowly rearranged itself every few minutes, and champions had to use logic, history, and spellwork to make sense of it. Marguerite Delacroix, the Beauxbatons champion who won that year, later said, "I never felt my life was in danger, only my pride." But as wizarding culture evolved, so too did the appetite for spectacle. The rise of publications like Witch Weekly and The Quibbler fueled a demand for dramatic visuals and heroic feats. This cultural shift explains why the 1994 tournament's dragon task was so widely publicized, even romanticized. The line between a competition of magical skill and a public performance grew ever thinner. Still, even within the modern iterations of the tournament, there have been efforts to return to a more thoughtful tradition. The 2007 unofficial revival, held illegally in a remote part of Albania, featured no dragons but relied heavily on cursed artifacts, time-based enchantments, and a final task involving moral decision-making. Though the event was eventually shut down by the International Confederation of Wizards, it sparked a renewed debate about what the tournament ought to represent. Some argue that dragons symbolize the raw challenge of magic untamed, the confrontation between humanity and nature. Others contend that using such creatures trivializes their majesty, reducing them to mere props. In the end, the truth may lie somewhere in between. Each tournament has been a reflection of its era, its fears, its values, and its thirst for spectacle or restraint. Dragons were never the rule. They were the exception, the spectacle reserved for moments when organizers wanted not just to test champions but to ignite headlines and public frenzy. And in that regard, they succeeded. But looking back at over 8 centuries of Triwizard history, it becomes clear that the most powerful challenges often weren't the ones involving fire and fang, they were the ones that tested the mind, heart, and soul. Perhaps that's what makes the tournament so enduring, its ability to evolve, to challenge in new ways, and to reflect the very best and worst of what it means to be a witch or wizard. As Dumbledore once said, it matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be. and in the flames of dragons or the silence of a riddled chamber, that truth has always burned bright. Number 24. Tournament was held in secret. In the long and turbulent history of the Triwizard tournament, there exists a chapter almost completely forgotten, concealed beneath centuries of silence and the weight of political necessity. While most recall the tournament of 1994 at Hogwarts, the dragons, the lake, the maze, few have ever heard of the secret Triwizard tournament held in 1649. It was not recorded in the official ministry logs, nor was it ever referenced in public discussions of inter-school competitions, but fragments of its legacy remain, scratched into the stone archives of Beauxbatons, murmured through enchanted whispers in the halls of Durmstrang, and carefully locked in the restricted section of the Hogwarts library. The truth is this: in 1649, at the height of Europe's witch-burning madness, a Triwizard tournament was held in secret, far beneath the snowbound mountains of the Alps. This tournament, shrouded in mystery, was born not out of celebration, but necessity. The witch hunts had reached a fever pitch, particularly in Germanic and French territories. Muggle courts executed suspected witches en masse, often without evidence or trial, and magical communities were forced into deeper isolation. The fledgling European Confederation of Wizards, not yet fully formed, feared that a public spectacle like the tournament might expose too much. Magical governments were not as robust then. The International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy would not be enacted until 1692. At the time, fear ruled more than law, and magic survived only by remaining invisible. And yet tradition is not easily killed. Despite the danger, the headmasters of Beauxbatons, Durmstrang and Hogwarts agreed that the tournament must continue, but it would be held without an audience, without fanfare, without the golden fire of opening ceremonies. It would happen underground, both literally and metaphorically. The host location was a vast, abandoned dwarven city carved deep into the roots of the Alps, a labyrinth of glowing crystal halls, forgotten spells, and protective enchantments woven centuries prior by ancient mountain clans. The site, known only to a handful of enchanters and geomancers, was perfect for secrecy. Participants were selected in silence. No goblet of fire was used, too unpredictable. Instead, candidates were nominated in secret by their headmasters, chosen not only for skill but for discretion. The names have been lost to time, all but one, Elizabeth Forte of Beauxbatons Academy, a name later whispered with reverence in magical diplomatic circles. She would go on to help draft some of the earliest policies in international magical cooperation, but in 1649 she was a student of 16 years, sharp-minded and fierce-spirited. What little remains of the events comes from a hidden collection of journals found in 1923, buried beneath the collapsed archives of the old Geneva enclave. These journals, believed to belong to a Durmstrang chaperone named Karl Reinhardt, describe the tournament in cryptic detail. The first task, according to the entries, involved traversing a field of undying phantoms, cursed spirits conjured to reflect each champion's deepest fear. Unlike boggarts, these illusions did not flee from laughter. They had to be outwitted or defeated through wandwork and sheer nerve. Elizabeth Forte, as Reinhardt described, faced a ghostly tribunal accusing her of witchcraft. It was an echo of the world above, the burning stakes, the iron chains, the accusatory stares. Rather than flee, she stood her ground and transfigured the vision into a flock of golden sparrows, dispersing the nightmare with grace. She defied the illusion not by force, Reinhardt wrote, but by reclaiming her identity with beauty. I have never seen such magic in one so young. The second task remains more enigmatic. The records mention a trial of blood and bone, a chamber where each champion was forced to confront a part of their ancestry, not all of it noble. Magical bloodlines, especially in that era, were often complicated by hidden lineages, betrayals, and shameful secrets. Durmstrang's contestant, unnamed in the texts, allegedly withdrew after discovering he was descended from a line of dark warlocks who aided Muggle hunters in exchange for gold. Elizabeth Forte emerged shaken but undefeated. No details are given of her trial, but some historians speculate that her mother had been executed in the witch trials of Lyon just 2 years prior, a fact Elizabeth never spoke of publicly. The final task, as recounted in Reinhardt's fragments, was held in a cavern called the Mirror Vault, a place where illusions became physical and thoughts could kill. It was said to be an abandoned experiment by the dwarves, who once sought to mine not metals but dreams. The contestants were released into a shimmering maze of obsidian and crystal where their own ambitions could twist into deadly traps. One wrong step, one selfish wish, and the vault would turn against them. Elizabeth's path through the Mirror Vault is the stuff of legend, or would be, had it ever been told outside hidden circles. According to the final entry in Reinhardt's journal, she reached the center of the maze and was confronted by a vision of herself. Older, powerful, seated in a throne of flame, the magical world at her feet. The vision tempted her, promising her dominance, respect, the end of secrecy, the fall of Muggle oppression. All she needed to do was take the throne. But she refused. Instead, she conjured water, simple, clear, and cooling, and extinguished the vision. She chose peace over power, Reinhardt wrote. In a time of war, that is the rarest magic. Her victory was not marked with trophies or cheering crowds. No banners were raised. The judges, cloaked in anonymity, quietly declared her the winner. Each contestant was sworn to secrecy, bound magically never to reveal the events to outsiders. Even their memories may have been partially altered, a common practice in that age. But the records survived in part, and more importantly, so did Elizabeth Forte's influence. By 1663, Elizabeth had joined the embryonic department for international magical cooperation. It was her proposals that helped establish the annual Assembly of Wand Carriers in Venice, a precursor to the modern Wizengamot conferences. She argued fiercely against isolationism, believing that cooperation between magical peoples must transcend fear and secrecy. Her colleagues noted her poise, her vision, and her unshakable calm when confronting threats of exposure from the Muggle world. "Perhaps," she once wrote, "it is because I have already faced the darkest mirror of myself and learned not to flinch." There is one curious passage in Reinhardt's journal that continues to puzzle magical historians. It appears scratched hastily, half-burned at the edge of the page. There were 4 contestants. The meaning of this is unclear. Only 3 schools were involved, and only 3 victors were ever declared. But rumours have persisted in obscure corners of the magical world of a 4th participant, neither student nor teacher, who joined the tournament uninvited. Some whisper of a rogue spellmaster from the Carpathians, exiled for heretical magic. Others claim it was a Muggle-born witch who had escaped execution and demanded a chance to prove her worth. The truth is lost, and perhaps for good reason. One of the most striking consequences of the secret tournament was its influence on the magical ethics surrounding public competitions. When the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy was finally signed in 1692, several clauses regarding inter-school events bore unmistakable echoes of Forte's post-tournament writings. The statute declared public magical demonstrations shall henceforth be approved only in cases where exposure to the Muggle world is rendered impossible. Her cautious voice, shaped in the fire of hidden trials, helped shape the very laws that kept wizardkind safe. There are no surviving portraits of Elizabeth Forte. Beauxbatons kept no moving images from that century, preferring traditional tapestries and enchanted statues. But her name endures in the scrolls of the International Confederation, and once a year, during the closed-door conference in Montreux, a single toast is raised by the head delegates to the champion beneath the mountain. No one explains the phrase. No outsider is ever told the story, but the gesture remains. Even Albus Dumbledore, known for his encyclopedic knowledge of magical history, once hinted at the tournament's existence during a quiet conversation with Minerva McGonagall, as noted in her personal journals decades later. "There was a time," he allegedly said, "when bravery had to be quiet to survive, and some of our greatest heroes lived and died in whispers." And perhaps that is where the true power of the 1649 tournament lies, not in spectacle, but in silence. It was a story written in darkness, lit only by the magic of those who dared to step into the void, not for glory, but for principle. Elizabeth Forte never became minister, she never published a memoir, but she changed the course of wizarding history, not by being seen, but by refusing to vanish. Number 25. Participants gained special status after winning. The Triwizard tournament was never a mere school competition. Behind the spectacle of dragons, underwater challenges and enchanted labyrinths lay a far more enduring reward than the 1,000-galleon prize. Champions of the Triwizard tournament stepped into a realm where their names became part of wizarding legend, etched into the very fabric of magical history. This status was neither ceremonial nor symbolic. It was real, tangible, and lasting, an invisible badge worn long after the cheers died down, often opening doors to power and influence that few others could access. For centuries, the tournament served as a crucible, forging not only physical strength but political and social capital. The very act of surviving the deadly tasks crafted to test bravery, intellect, and magical ability to their limit, was considered proof of excellence. Ministries of magic across Europe began to recognize this unofficial title, Champion of Champions, as a credential on par with any formal education or examination. Employers saw Triwizard champions as battle-tested, naturally resourceful individuals. Departments dealing with magical law enforcement, international cooperation, and even unspeakable experimental magic vied to recruit these rare graduates of fire and spell. Take, for instance, Émilie de Rosier of Beauxbatons, the 1823 champion. Her victory in the infamous Ice Vault trial, where she navigated through shifting crystal caverns guarded by frost elementals, won her not only applause but an invitation to the Department of International Magical Cooperation. Within a decade, she was appointed as France's ambassador to the International Confederation of Wizards. Her tenure helped resolve the Great Troll Dispute of 1832, and her deft diplomacy was widely attributed to the confidence and strategic mindset she had developed during the tournament. Similarly, Willem Stroh of Durmstrang, champion in 1890, became Minister of Magic in the Netherlands. His career trajectory had humble beginnings, born to a family of broom merchants in Utrecht. But his triumph, outwitting a cursed Hungarian horntail with an unorthodox use of jelly-legs jinxes and mirror enchantments, caught the attention of influential figures in the Dutch ministry. His victory, splashed across wizarding newspapers for weeks, was followed by a meteoric rise. He often spoke of the tournament as his second birth, claiming, "You do not leave the Triwizard maze as the same boy who entered it." And yet the prestige was a double-edged wand. Champions found themselves under scrutiny unlike any other group in the magical world. Rita Skeeter's articles in the Daily Prophet often singled out former champions, prying into their personal lives, inflating their flaws, and spinning harmless anecdotes into front-page scandals. Fleur Delacour, long after her participation, had to battle perceptions shaped by the press. Her grace and Vila heritage were frequently misinterpreted, and her intellect underestimated, yet her subsequent work with Gringotts and her brave role in the Battle of Hogwarts stood as a silent rebuttal to the press-fueled bias. Cedric Diggory's case is a haunting counterpoint. Though he did not live to reap the long-term societal rewards of being a champion, his selection alone elevated him in the eyes of the wizarding world. "He was always the one who made the rest of us look like we'd been put together with bits of old wire," said a classmate, and his performance in the tournament was marked by sportsmanship and honor. Dumbledore, at the memorial feast, spoke solemnly, "Remember Cedric Diggory as you remember a champion in more than name." The reverence attached to his name is a testament to the enduring power of the champion's status even in tragedy. The Ministry of Magic in the UK maintained an unofficial dossier of Triwizard participants, noting their achievements and offering them opportunities not extended to others. A little-known fact is that Triwizard champions were regularly invited to confidential symposiums regarding magical education, dark arts suppression, and cross-border alliances. Though the tournament was suspended for decades due to its danger, former champions remained symbols of potential and excellence. They were consulted in times of crisis. When the threat of Gellert Grindelwald spread across Europe, Two former champions, Lucia Weber of Durmstrang and Bernard Kettleburn of Hogwarts, were called to advise on resistance strategies, drawing on their experience navigating unpredictable magical threats. And yet champions also became targets. Dark wizards, hungry to make names for themselves, sometimes saw former champions as trophies to be claimed or threats to be neutralized. The curse of the tarnished goblet, as it was whispered in the 1930s, claimed the lives of two champions, Søren Madsen and Pilar Reyes, who were allegedly hunted down by remnants of a Balkan dark coven that opposed ministry authority. The goblet, it seemed, marked more than excellence. It left a magical echo, a traceable energy that certain dark artifacts could detect. Some argued it made champions easier to track. This undercurrent of danger never diminished the societal reverence. Even the goblet itself was treated as a quasi-religious relic, with replicas kept in wizarding museums and sanctified in ritual before each tournament. Its glow, blue, eerie, sentient, symbolized fate choosing the worthy. To be selected was to be anointed by magic itself, and the wizarding public never forgot that. Perhaps the most controversial post-tournament career was that of Victor Krum. Though only 17 during the 1994 tournament and overshadowed by the chaos of Voldemort's return, Krum parlayed his reputation into a diplomatic bridge between Eastern and Western magical governments. His alliance with the Bulgarian ministry and his later work helping the reformed Durmstrang curriculum to abandon its dark arts tolerance made him a paradox, a former Durmstrang student who advocated reform. Critics saw his Triwizard fame as an undeserved advantage. Supporters claimed it gave him the platform to make real change. The lasting impact of being a champion wasn't limited to politics. Cultural figures emerged from the tournament's legacy. Isadora Fern, the Hogwarts champion of 1927, turned her experiences into a best-selling memoir, Through Fire and Ice, which was later adapted into a popular Wizarding Wireless Network series. The book's dramatized recounting of her third task, escaping a shifting sand maze filled with whispering bog spirits, captured imaginations for generations. Her fame endured not because of policy or power, but because she made the arcane intimate and the dangerous poetic. Harry Potter himself, of course, was an accidental champion. His forced participation broke every rule of the tournament, and his victory, if one could call a surviving Voldemort a victory, made him the most famous wizard of his generation. But fame and status were not rewards he sought. Quote, "I didn't put my name in that cup," echoed not just through Hogwarts halls but through the ministry debates in the following year. And yet, despite his protestations, the Triwizard title never left him. Aura recruiters whispered about it. International offices sent offers. It was as though magic itself had written his resume. The power of the title was generational. Children of champions were said to inherit a certain legacy. While there was no official policy on bloodlines in post-tournament appointments, anecdotal evidence suggests that a champion's child had easier access to elite magical schools, was more likely to be scouted by Quidditch teams, and was regularly featured in society columns. The tournament was a life-changer not only for the wizard who won it, but for their entire lineage. But there was also the burden of legend. Champions were expected to remain exceptional, forever defined by a youthful feat. Some crumbled under that pressure. One such example was Amelia Roche, Beauxbatons' 1975 champion. Though she excelled in the tournament, she later withdrew from public life, citing the unbearable weight of being admired. Her disappearance became a minor mystery in magical circles, and her legacy remains a cautionary tale about the cost of brilliance. The Wizarding Examination Authority even considered offering automatic exemptions or bonuses to former champions, treating their tournament performance as proof of practical skill. Though the proposal was never passed into law, it illustrates how seriously the magical community took the tournament's reputation. Professors, too, held champions in esteem. Horace Slughorn, ever fond of collecting talented protégés, spoke admiringly of multiple champions, stating they're already tested in the crucible. That sort of thing polishes the soul. And indeed, many believed that the tournament revealed the true core of a person. It stripped away comfort and illusion, leaving only courage, wit, and instinct. As the tasks escalated, there was no hiding. Champions who emerged unbroken were seen not only as survivors, but as those worthy of carrying Wizarding Society forward. Even decades after their time, former champions were often called upon during international summits and magical crises. They served as arbitrators, expert witnesses, and living proof that greatness could be cultivated, not just inherited. Their insight into magical combat, ancient curses, and high-pressure enchantments was considered invaluable. Thus, the Triwizard tournament was never just a game. It was an initiation, a branding, a prophecy. Those who bore the mark of its victory walked taller, spoke with greater weight, and bore both the accolades and the shadows that came with it. It was a title that outlived youth and echoed through time. In the quiet offices of the ministry and the thunderous halls of the Wizengamot, the word champion still meant more than anyone dared to admit. Number 26. The tournament had a unique audience culture. The Triwizard tournament, as chronicled in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, is often remembered for its perilous tasks and high-stakes drama. But there's a lesser-discussed layer to this magical tradition: the spectators. In modern iterations, such as the one held at Hogwarts in 1994, the experience of the audience was notably restrained. The tasks were held in secluded locations, often inaccessible or shielded from the general view. But this was not always the case. In centuries past, the tournament was not merely a test of magical strength and wit, but a grand public event more akin to a wizarding festival than a private trial. The people who came to witness the tournament were as much a part of its story as the champions themselves. Historical accounts, preserved in the archives of Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, reveal that earlier tournaments, especially those from the 13th to 15th centuries, were massive social and magical gatherings. Entire wizarding villages would temporarily relocate to host the event. Enchanted pavilions would be erected overnight, and merchants would arrive from across Europe to sell bewitched trinkets, snacks that changed flavors every bite, and miniature fire dragons that perched on children's shoulders and whispered encouragements in broken Latin. One of the most talked-about tournaments occurred in 1388, when the event was hosted by the Austrievich Institute of Magical Excellence, deep in the bewitched forests of the Carpathian Mountains. The chosen site was not arbitrary. The forest itself was sentient, and its trees had been trained to whisper commentary in unison, a magical feat attributed to the Transfiguration master Eduardus Grun. Spectators from as far as the Shetland Islands arrived on broom caravans, thestral-drawn stagecoaches, and even via synchronized portkey chains managed by ministry-appointed safety marshals. The centerpiece of the 1388 tournament was not merely the champions, but the extraordinary arrangements made for the audience. Thousands of enchanted floating platforms were suspended high above the forest floor, providing panoramic views of the trials below. The platforms bobbed gently like boats on calm water, held in place by invisible netting woven from charm-threaded moon silk. Families sat wrapped in self-warming cloaks, sipping from self-refilling mugs of steaming clove cider, while magical screens hovered around them, offering close-ups of the champions' faces. The first two tasks were executed flawlessly, but the final trial ended in disaster. The floating platforms, so innovative and bold, were not tested for endurance against shock spells. When a Hungarian champion named Vasilka Drobnik used an explosive curse to fend off a wyvern, the shockwave disrupted the stabilizing enchantments. A cluster of platforms crashed into the trees, leading to broken limbs, bruised egos, and a magical inquiry that lasted 7 years. The incident became a defining moment in magical spectator safety law. The Austrievich disaster, as it came to be known, introduced a generation of new regulations under the International Confederation of Wizards. From then on, spectator security took precedence over spectacle. By the 17th century, Triwizard tournaments had shifted their tone. The bombastic theatrics of earlier centuries were replaced with calculated minimalism. The era of elaborate floating seats and talking trees gave way to magically shielded arenas and controlled visibility. A French historian, Lucienne Delacour, believed to be a distant ancestor of Fleur, wrote in her essay Le Public et le Pouvoir, "The tournament no longer belongs to the people, it is a chessboard for the few, and the audience has become a silhouette behind the curtain." Nevertheless, remnants of the old ways persisted. In the 1792 tournament held in the Spanish Pyrenees, the host school created a living colosseum out of animated marble. The stands moved and reshaped themselves based on the flow of the task. A student from Mahutokoro, who had travelled for the occasion, described the experience in his journal. The walls bent like reeds in the wind, rising higher when dragons soared, collapsing when champions fell. We watched the earth breathe. But even this elaborate design kept the spectators at a safer distance than in earlier centuries. What is particularly curious is how the function of the audience changed, not just in terms of location, but also in their purpose. In the 14th century, spectators were considered magical witnesses. Their presence was not just tolerated, but necessary to validate the tasks. There are records of judges consulting crowd members after tasks to confirm whether spells were cast correctly or whether a beast had been fairly overcome. In one documented case from 1311, a Norwegian champion named Aslak Hovgard was disqualified when a group of spectators swore on enchanted truth stones that he had used a forbidden vanishing spell on his opponent's hippogriff. Merchandise and magical souvenirs also tell the story of the evolving tournament experience. In 1422, a British enchanter named Marvolo Penwick sold charmed miniature hydras that mimicked the champion's actions in real time. They became so popular that the Romanian ministry had to ban them temporarily after one grew to an unnatural size and consumed a judge's hat. Centuries later, similar ideas appeared in Diagon Alley during the 1994 tournament, where Fred and George Weasley developed a prototype of collectible badges that morphed based on who was winning. Interestingly, one can trace how the culture of the tournament began to split between a communal magical celebration and a strictly monitored competitive event. The shift was likely influenced by the 1707 Wand Riot during a task in Bavaria when rival fan groups clashed using Confundus charms and conjured weather storms. The duel between the French and German spectators ended with 35 people cursed into speaking only in rhyme for the rest of the month. The ministry's response was swift. Spectator access was reduced, wands were confiscated at entry, and for the first time in Triwizard history, an entire task was performed behind a cloaking charm. By the 19th century, the tournament had become almost a closed ceremony. Attendance was limited to officials, family members, and select press. The general public was offered only brief glimpses through magically enhanced portraits commissioned after the fact. The sense of collective anticipation, the roar of thousands cheering, the street festivals that once surrounded the event, all of it was gone. In place of floating platforms and talking trees came high fences, magical barriers, and the eerie silence of private suffering. Hogwarts' hosting of the 1994 tournament marked a symbolic return, albeit a cautious one. The first task with the dragons was watched from a specially constructed amphitheatre, elevated above the arena and shielded by multiple layers of enchantments. Even then, the danger was palpable. As Hermione noted in the book, are they allowed to do that? When she saw the scale of the dragons involved, the second task, held underwater in the Black Lake, offered almost no live viewing. Magical screens displayed hazy underwater images, a far cry from the grandeur of historical crowd immersion. The third task was the most telling, a maze so dense and magical that even the teachers could not monitor it fully. The spectators were left to stare at hedges, waiting, praying, guessing. Yet despite the sterility of modern arrangements, echoes of the past remained. Ludo Bagman, ever the showman, tried to inject some of that festival spirit back into the proceedings. He announced the scores with flair, conjured magical confetti, and tried to entertain the crowd between tasks. But his efforts only underscored how far the tournament had drifted from its origins. The audience no longer shaped the story, they merely received it. A rarely discussed document, the People's Scroll, written by a Muggle-born wizard named Gregory Finch in 1503, argued that the presence of ordinary witches and wizards elevated the champion's actions into legend. A spell cast in silence is a secret. A spell cast in view of many becomes history. This notion, that the gaze of the many gave power to the deeds of the few, was central to the tournament's ancient philosophy. But in an age of secrecy and danger, such ideals became harder to uphold. Even so, modern spectatorship has its merits. The restricted audience sizes, while sterile, ensured greater safety. There were no crashing platforms or dueling fan groups in 1994. And while the crowd's interaction was limited, magical broadcasting allowed a wider, though passive, participation. By the end of the final task, when Harry Potter re-emerged clutching the body of Cedric Diggory, the stunned silence of the audience said more than any roar of the past could have. The tournament had once again become history, not because of grand crowds or enchanted seats, but because of tragedy and truth. The story of the Triwizard tournament is not just the story of champions braving dragons, lakes, and mazes. It is also the story of thousands of eyes that once looked on in wonder, the hum of magical vendors, the laughter of children chasing bewitched balloons, and the collective gasp of a crowd witnessing the impossible. That history may be quieter now, buried under layers of safety protocols and bureaucratic caution, but it lingers in enchanted tapestries, in old wizarding songs, and in the memories of those who still remember, when magic was not only cast wine but shared. Let us not forget that before the tournament became an institution of protocol and private peril, it was a carnival of courage, where not only the champions were tested, but where the audience believed, even if only for a moment, that they too were part of something immortal. Number 27. Muggle technology once affected the tournament. In the long and storied history of the Triwizard tournament, few events stand out quite like the infamous 1925 incident involving Arno Lemke of Durmstrang Institute. It was a time of political tension, rapid advancement in both the Muggle and magical worlds, and a brewing suspicion between the two societies. Yet it was also a time of innovation when the thin barrier between magic and Muggle technology was, for a brief and unexpected moment, pierced in a way that would change the rules of one of the wizarding world's most ancient and prestigious competitions. Arno Lemke was not a name destined for eternal glory. He did not win the tournament, nor was he a prodigy in spellwork or dueling. But what made him memorable, perhaps even infamous, was the quiet ingenuity with which he exploited a loophole no one had considered before. Arno, 17, tall and thin with an unusually sharp mind for enchantments, had an obsession with Muggle contraptions, an obsession he kept carefully hidden in a school like Durmstrang, which looked upon anything non-magical with disdain. It was said that he disassembled a typewriter in his 4th year and rebuilt it to type spells in runic shorthand, though none could ever prove it. By 1925, radio had become a cornerstone of Muggle communication, broadcasting everything from news reports to symphonic music across great distances. Wizards, naturally suspicious of such devices, largely ignored them until Arno discovered something strange. With minor enchantments, he realized, a Muggle radio could be tuned to detect certain low-frequency magical signatures. It could not decipher spells, of course, but it could listen to magical environments, detecting the auras and ambient hum of spellwork in ways not even the best omnioculars could. Arno's plan was meticulously crafted. As the tournament's first task approached, held in the rugged valleys near Durmstrang's secret Baltic stronghold, he modified a compact Muggle radio receiver. Instead of broadcasting or receiving traditional Muggle signals, it was re-enchanted to detect whispers of intent, a kind of arcane frequency said to emanate from wizards when discussing complex magical operations. It wasn't foolproof, but Arno didn't need perfection, just an edge. Before the first task, while the champions were resting in their respective chambers, Arno concealed the device beneath a thick woolen scarf in his satchel. The tournament officials, including High Judge Beatrix Goring of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, conducted standard wand inspections, security charms, and detection spells. But magical law at the time had no protocol for identifying enchanted Muggle objects. To the judges, Arno's satchel was as mundane as a lunch basket. That evening, as the judges gathered in the tent overlooking the arena to finalize the enchantments for the task, Arno turned the dial on the receiver, adjusting for magical feedback. The air filled with faint echoes, not words, not exactly, but murmurs, half-thoughts, flickers of intention. With effort, and using a rune-deciphering spell layered over the radio's frequency, Arno heard just enough to deduce that the first task would involve a creature native to the Scandinavian wilds, a frost wyvern bound in enchanted chains, guarding a silver egg. He did not learn the full details, nor could he prepare entirely, but he entered the arena with a calm no other champion had. When the wyvern emerged, cloaked in icy mist, Arno did not waste time experimenting. He immediately cast a variant of the Defodio charm, one that created a ring of heated earth around the egg, disorienting the cold-blooded beast. While the wyvern screeched and stumbled, trying to cool itself, Arno dashed forward and retrieved the egg with remarkable speed. Though he didn't come first in the overall scoring, the French champion, Léonine Dumont, achieved a more dazzling feat by subduing the wyvern entirely. Arno's performance was unexpected, nearly flawless, and raised questions behind the scenes. How had he known what spell to use? Why was he so precise? Headmaster Igor Varnask of Durmstrang, not known for leniency, demanded an inquiry, fearing embarrassment for his school. The investigation revealed what many suspected but could not initially prove. It was an older Durmstrang groundskeeper named Victor Vass, once a rival of Arno's late father, who eventually provided the key evidence. He had seen Arno tinkering with the device during a midnight walk around the castle grounds. "The boy has Muggle tools," he reportedly told officials. "They sing when no one speaks." The Magical Tournament Council assembled a special panel to review the incident. Arno was questioned under veritaserum and admitted without hesitation to using the modified radio. "I did not cheat," he said. "I merely listened to what others carelessly broadcasted. If magic is to evolve, must we not question the walls we build around it?" His words caused a stir. Some accused him of betrayal, of diluting wizarding tradition with Muggle impurity. Others, especially younger witches and wizards, praised his innovation. The Prophet ran the headline, "Muggle Tech in the Tournament, Bright Mind or Dangerous Precedent." In the days that followed, a heated debate took place across the wizarding world. A joint statement from the Department of Magical Games and Sports and the Department of Magical Law Enforcement condemned Arno's actions, yet hesitated to strip him of his points. The rules as written did not prohibit such devices, the statement read, but the spirit of the tournament was undeniably compromised. In response, sweeping reforms were enacted before the next tournament in 1932. All champions would henceforth be scanned with newly developed enchanted interference detectors, devices that combined Muggle-style electromagnetic readings with anti-enchantment wards. Any non-magical object capable of channeling or detecting magical frequencies would be banned. These scanners, still in use today, are known unofficially as Lemke locks, a name whispered with a mixture of mockery and awe. Interestingly, the 1925 event marked the beginning of a broader conversation among wizarding intellectuals about the nature of magic and technology. Arno Lemke later became a private inventor, known for controversial work at the boundary between enchantment and mechanics. Though his inventions were never publicly adopted by the ministry, a few experimental Auror squads are rumoured to use his modified Muggle goggles in low-visibility operations. The Triwizard tournament, once steeped solely in wandwork, courage, and raw instinct, had been forever altered. While Arno did not win eternal glory in the Hall of Champions, his story became one of the most discussed cases in magical ethics. Professor Batilda Bagshot referenced the incident in a 1948 addendum to A History of Magic, writing, "It is not always the victor whose name survives the centuries, but often the one who forces the law to rewrite itself." No official quote from Arno was ever published after his graduation, though he was rumoured to have written anonymously in the underground journal The Wand and the Wrench, a now-banned publication dedicated to exploring the synthesis of magic and Muggle design. In one issue, believed to be penned by him, an article titled "Listening to Magic" began with the provocative line, "Perhaps our ears are too magical to hear the future calling from a transistor." The debate about whether Muggle inventions have a place in magical tradition continues to this day. Even decades later, when Harry Potter faced the Triwizard tournament in 1994, echoes of Arno's scandal were still felt. In the task where champions had to retrieve something valuable from the depths of the Hogwarts lake, additional layers of security were added, not to keep champions safe, but to prevent unauthorized magical aid. As Professor McGonagall told the judges, "We remember 1925, we will not have a repeat." In the end, the Lemke incident, sometimes called the radio scandal, became not only a turning point in tournament history, but also a symbol of the delicate balance between tradition and progress. The incident forced the magical community to confront a reality it had long avoided. The Muggle world was not only advancing, it was beginning to create tools that could, under the right circumstances, touch the edges of magic. And that perhaps was what frightened the wizarding elite most, not the idea of a student cheating, but the idea that the veil separating the magical and the non-magical was thinner than anyone dared admit. Number 28. One tournament ended with all champions disappearing. In the long and tangled history of magical contests, few events evoke as much silent dread among historians as the Triwizard tournament of 1790. Held on the secluded grounds of Durmstrang Institute, this particular iteration of the famed competition would not end with fanfare or celebration. It would vanish into obscurity, swallowed by fear, whispers, and a silence that persists to this day. The Triwizard tournament, known for its daring trials and international unity, became the stage for one of the darkest unsolved disappearances in the wizarding world. The Durmstrang Institute, perched atop a mountain shrouded in northern fog and myth, had long been viewed as the most severe of the three participating schools. Its reclusive traditions and emphasis on the darker branches of magic gave the 1790 tournament an immediate atmosphere of foreboding. The headmaster at the time, Stellan Vortigern, was a strict traditionalist who believed that magical excellence was achieved only through survival of the fittest. Many saw his approach to the tournament as an attempt to prove Durmstrang's dominance, not just in magical theory, but in sheer endurance. The champions that year were not ordinary students. Each was known in their region for extraordinary magical skill. From Beauxbatons came Victoire Laveau, a descendant of the infamous Marie Laveau, known for her eerie ability to speak Parseltongue, a fact that had never been publicly disclosed to the other schools. From Hogwarts came Alaric Umber, a reserved boy from the Isle of Skye, whose affinity with elemental magic was said to rival the most skilled wand-makers. And from Durmstrang there was Emil Drakenhoff, a boy with a hollow stare and a reputation for cruelty to magical creatures. Together, they entered a tournament shaped not only by tradition, but by the dark inclinations of its host institution. The first two tasks were dangerous, as expected, but manageable. The first involved recovering a wand stolen by a magically animated golem hidden beneath the icy surface of the Black Lake. Victoire triumphed through clever use of a warming charm combined with a slicing hex to disrupt the creature's joints. The second task required the taming of a storm elemental, conjured from an ancient ritual scroll written in pre-runic dialect. Alaric's natural control over wind and lightning earned him admiration even from Durmstrang's faculty, who rarely praised non-native students. It was the third task, however, that would etch itself into legend. The final trial was to be held in the labyrinth of Eldfjall, a twisted maze grown upon the ruins of sacred runic shrines abandoned centuries ago. The maze was not of hedge or stone, but of shimmering, shifting barriers composed of magical energy, infused with protections and enchantments so old that even the teachers hesitated to approach it. Some said the maze itself was alive, its structure reacting to fear, guilt, or desire. Others believed it was built as a tomb for ancient dark wizards whose names had been deliberately erased from history. According to the surviving records held in the restricted section of Durmstrang's library, the maze had been awakened by Headmaster Vortigern himself, using blood magic and a staff carved from the remains of a thunderbird. No official statement survives, but a journal entry from an unnamed professor who resigned shortly after the tournament speaks volumes. "I warned him. I said the wards were still active, but he would not listen. The labyrinth remembers. It never forgets." On the evening of the final task, the three champions stood before the labyrinth's entrance, surrounded by cheering students and an uneasy quiet from the staff. The sky above was streaked with red and gold, as if the sun itself had taken notice of what was about to unfold. Victoire, Alaric, and Emile stepped through the glimmering archway one by one. Moments later, the entrance closed behind them, pulsing briefly with violet light, then going still. What followed was a silence that grew with every passing hour. The magical timers set to monitor the progress of the champions displayed nothing, not a flicker, not a tremor. After 5 hours, Durmstrang faculty attempted to reopen the archway. The spells rebounded violently, flinging 2 professors into the snow. The headmaster made no attempt himself. For 2 days the entrance remained sealed, then without warning it vanished entirely. What shocked the wizarding world was not just the disappearance, but the absolute lack of evidence. No magical residue remained. No trace of the champions' wands, footprints, hair, or clothing. The investigative task force sent by the Department of International Magical Cooperation could not even determine the structure's former location. The runic foundation stones had crumbled into dust. "It is as though the labyrinth consumed itself," read one of the few surviving ministry reports. "There is nothing but cold." The only clue, if it can be called that, was found weeks later, etched into the bark of an ancient pine tree half a mile from the site. It read simply Yulander, an Old Norse rune for wanderer. The origin of the carving remains unknown. Some believe it was left by a frantic escapee. Others claim it was the maze's final whisper to the world. What adds to the mystery is that not one of the champions had any known connection to each other prior to the tournament. There were no feuds, no alliances, no shared history. They were strangers brought together by fate or something far darker. Even their families refused to speak publicly about their children, and all 3 bloodlines quietly withdrew from public magical life in the years that followed. The absence of magical remnants perplexed even the most seasoned investigators. Wands, robes, and even hair typically leave traces detectable through advanced detection charms. But here there was nothing. "I've worked aura cases for 30 years, wrote Benjamin Borgin in his memoir Shadows Over Spellcraft. Even when someone is disintegrated by fiend fire, something lingers, a scorched stone, a melted ring. But Durmstrang 1790, it's as though they were erased. Theories abound, and none are comforting. One suggests the labyrinth was a gate to a sealed dimension, a pocket realm created by ancient warlocks to trap their enemies. Another posits that the maze was cursed to trap souls as tribute to some forgotten entity once worshipped in the runic shrines. A third, whispered only in the most obscure circles, claims that the 3 champions were not victims, but chosen vessels, whose disappearance completed a ritual begun centuries earlier. One particularly chilling theory surfaced in the 1890s when a group of curse breakers from Gringotts stumbled upon a sealed vault deep beneath a ruin in Estonia. Inside was a mural depicting 3 hooded figures walking into a radiant spiral surrounded by runes. Their faces bore uncanny resemblance to the missing champions of 1790. The mural has since been sealed off by the Department of Mysteries. J.K. Rowling once hinted at the incident obliquely in the Goblet of Fire, where Dumbledore addresses the danger of the Triwizard tournament. "We have done everything in our power to ensure that this year's tournament is as safe as it can be, but it is not without its history of tragedy." Though never named, many scholars believe this line alludes directly to the 1790 disappearance. Why then, despite this tragedy, was the tournament ever resumed? The answer lies in politics. The magical world in the 18th century was entering an age of international collaboration, and cancelling such a symbolic event permanently would have signalled weakness. The 1792 tournament was hastily arranged, this time hosted at Beauxbatons. But it too would be marred by catastrophe. A cockatrice escaped its enclosure and maimed several high-profile guests, including the Minister for Magic of Liechtenstein. This double blow led to the 2-century hiatus that followed. In 1994, the Triwizard tournament was resurrected once more, this time under the strict supervision of Albus Dumbledore. Unbeknownst to the public, the Ministry had included a clause banning the use of certain magical structures, including mazes with untraceable enchantment origins. It was this clause that nearly derailed the final task in Harry Potter's year, until Dumbledore himself negotiated an exception by proving the maze was built under controlled conditions. Even now, over 2 centuries later, the disappearance of Victoire, Alaric, and Emile casts a long, cold shadow. Magical historians still debate its meaning. Some say it was an accident, others believe it was the fulfillment of a prophecy long buried, and yet a few hold out hope, not for their return, but for understanding, because the wizarding world has always feared what it cannot explain, and Durmstrang 1790 remains one of its most harrowing enigmas. To this day, no student at Durmstrang is permitted to venture near the old northern ruins. They are marked off with ancient warning glyphs, some of which no one alive can fully translate. From time to time, strange lights are reported in the skies above them, blue flickering orbs that vanish when approached. And once, in 1967, a group of students claimed to hear whispering voices on the wind, repeating a single word, Eldfjall. Whatever the truth may be, the labyrinth that consumed 3 champions has become a myth, a warning, and a wound that magic cannot heal. It teaches that even in a world of spells and potions, some doors should never be opened, some trials should never be set, and some victories come at too great a price.